Welcome back to the Coach Robb Podcast Network, another episode of Navigating Amateur Motocross, episode number 11, brought to you by Complete Med Solutions. Mr. Derek Harris, how the heck you doing, buddy?
Hey, Coach. Good to see you. I guess you've stuck around with me for 11 of these suckers, I think we said. So doing good.
It's always good to see you. And in this once a month, I don't know, man. I feel like I need to see you on a little bit more of a regular basis than once every 4 or 5 weeks. But I don't know, especially the way that the amateur market's growing. And um, when I look at the number of DMs that I've gotten regarding our previous 10 shows, asking for more asking for more clarification of things that we brought up. And you've been kind enough for those of you that have been with us, the 10 previous shows, number 11 here. I've got a lot more questions for the genius himself. When I look at the motors and I look at suspension and setting it up, if you guys didn't get a chance to listen to our last show, number 10, Derek gave us a tremendous amount of insight walking through setting up a bike. And if you haven't had a chance to watch that, I would encourage you to start there because we're going to continue that conversation here today. And Derek, and I know you don't like it when I call you the genius, you're extremely humble. But when I look at the responses not so much the responses, but the DMs and the emails that I get from people on a regular basis, I would say 60% of them every single month say the same thing. Damn, that Derek guy is smart. And I've shared some of them with you. And I know you don't like it because you're very humble. When you talked last time about setting up a bike and you walk through, like you say, what you think is a click really is insignificant. I think that was probably one of the biggest feedbacks I got was, oh, I thought I was doing something good by turning it 2 clicks. And you're like, you're not even going to feel it. In your opinion, just to kind of get our conversation started, I always hear that the moto parents debating, should we invest in a faster motor? Should we invest in better suspension? You hear some parents, man, these stock motors, they're just not fast enough. And then you talk to some parents who are like, oh, Johnny, he doesn't ride it fast enough anyways. We always say that power, if it can't get delivered to the ground, is pretty much useless. It almost seems like it's a rhetorical, endless loop that I need somebody like yourself to at least get a starting point. There may not be a right or a wrong, but in your opinion, where do we start?
Well, this is a really nuanced discussion because, in my opinion, if you just look at it from a data standpoint, the fact of the matter is that power really doesn't matter. And as an engine builder, that's hard to say. So the crazy part is that humans can somehow sense these nuanced little changes that are almost hard to measure from an engineering standpoint. So when some kid says, oh man, that bike is better than this bike, and it's not even close, and you go, okay, huh? And they're both stock and they're both brand new, and you go put them on the dyno and you're like, nah, they pretty much make the same power. Maybe one's a little better than the other, but we're talking tenths of horsepowers, right?
Based on paper.
Yeah.
Based on
So you
paper.
go,
Okay.
huh? And maybe you listen to one and the other, and one might sound a little cleaner or something. And then you go, for my shop's located on about 5 acres of land. So I can go ride them around the front of the shop. And back in the day, I had a little tiny corner track in the back. When I rode a lot, I would ride. And I could go ride. And sometimes you might tell, like, yeah, this one is a little bit better. But if I just go drag race them, if the dyno said they were close, they will be the same. But somehow little Johnny says, man, that one bike, that's the only one I want to ride. So this is where we have a challenge in our industry because in data, it really wouldn't matter. He can go get the same start on both bikes. He can go get the acceleration rate. You'll be able to clear the same jumps. All that's the same. But little Johnny can feel some difference there that is enough for him to be like, there's something big. So I think that this question boils down to, do we do engine or suspension? What's better? What's more relevant? How much does motor matter? I think it matters less than parents really want to believe. They want to believe that, yes, there's some factory difference or there's some bike difference, or I can just buy a success. But the answer is not really true. And then the real nuance to the question is, or the real nuance is even within that fold, let's say you go buy 3 race engines from us, your kid still may prefer one of them, which is really weird because we wouldn't be able to see a data difference. We'd be like, no, this engine's really good. So that's where humans, I think, are overly sensitive in certain departments, or what your kid values or what the rider values oftentimes are really these intangibles. And I would say, and this probably drives manufacturers absolutely crazy when they're trying to develop motorcycles. They're like, I don't know what these guys are talking about. Our bike's really good. So that's, I mean, go look at the current 250F shootout if you're into, the 4-stroke thing that just came out. And I think Yamaha was top of dog or up there. I think it was I think the three bikes that I remember being really good, which should be no surprise, they are three good bikes, was the Yamaha Triumph and KTM. The Triumph is a little bit of a surprise, but the Yamaha and KTM being like the two top dogs. But even the worst bike in class on paper, which is a Suzuki, which is, I mean, we're talking an over 10-year-old engine architecture, old bike. On paper, it's not so much different that you still couldn't win on that bike as an amateur. Right now, is it different? Yes, but on paper, your kid could still win on that bike. And proofs in the pudding. There have been, amateur efforts that have, and people like, oh, they modded it to the gills. And I can tell you right now, we've tested those bikes from. I'll just say we have tested some really good Suzukis, and they're not better than a production KTM. So kids are winning on those, right, with the motorcycle package that maybe the chassis or whatever, but the motor's just not as relevant as we want to make it out to be.
You just hit on one of my biggest pet peeves, and I hope I'm not going too much down a bunny trail away from what you just talked about. You've mentioned to me where people will buy a motor from you, have it configured a certain way, and say that it comes on too hard and signs off too quick. And you've been kind enough to educate me. Would you mind elaborating on that just a little bit? Because I think it's interesting that when people, they come across as being disappointed in the way that a motor is performing, but that's the way the motor was designed. I know we can start adding gearing and all kinds of other stuff. We don't need to go down that deep, but do you mind elaborating on that a little bit? Because I found it fascinating.
Yeah, so this is actually for two strokes in particular, but it applies 100% to a four stroke. Exact same concept. Is that if I make you more power, let's just say I improve the power of that motorcycle, and I do so pretty much across the usable power range. Like in the power band, that bike makes more horsepower. You will, as a perception, like as a rider, what you perceive will say it revs out faster and it pulls shorter. And a lot of kids would be like, it just has no top anymore. Well, let's think about this and take dirt bikes out of the equation. If I am my strength, and then we have the world's strongest man next to me, and we have a pulley and a weight, and my job is to pull the pulley and the weight up to the top of the pole, like say some challenge, and his job is to pull the pulley and the weight to some challenge, right? And it's within the means that we both are capable of getting it there. He's going to get that weight there way faster than me. On any planet we want to measure horsepower, and that is a measurement of horsepower, he makes more power than me, right? But he got there faster. Well, that's the exact same thing on your motorcycle. Is when we make more horsepower, and we talked about this on a rev limiter way back on the early shows, is that the rev limiter is mechanically limiting how fast your motorcycle can go in that gear at that RPM. So in order to go faster, you need to shift to the next gear, which then allows us to go faster again. Two strokes now the EFI ones have rev limiters, but a lot of kids don't realize that carbureted and whatnot have essentially a rev limiter, which is where your power is essentially done pulling. You need to shift to keep the bike into its usable portion of power. And the faster your motorcycle becomes, the sooner you will have to shift. And it's not that the RPM is less, it's that we got to there quicker. And so this is where a lot of people go wrong, is that they just don't grasp that concept. And so when you go build a truly good mod bike, one that actually makes horsepower, you're going to get there quicker. So the solutions to that problem are we can gear it taller, which means that now we're going to spread that additional power that we made out longer in trade for making it pull less hard than it pulled with the other gearing.
But
right?
doesn't that also sacrifice that acceleration out of the corner? Don't you give up? The
gains that we may have got from our horsepower gains are now going to be sacrificed in the gearing change, right?
Okay.
But if anything, that might be a direction you want to go, because width of power has always been more important for a lot of, that's why four strokes are so solid. I mean, they're just wide power. The other side of that is, from a mathematical standpoint, is average horsepower being delivered to the track. And this is where kids just, if you don't shift quickly enough, if you're always over revved, you're not making use of all the extra power your motor builder might have built you. And so you're into this over rev region where the power goes up and then it kind of flattens and then it goes down. Whether you have the world's best mod bike or the world's worst motorcycle, this region where it curved over doesn't really change. So if your kid likes to ride out here all the time, which every kid loves to scream these motorcycles out, you're making no more horsepower, whether it be a mod or an average, and then your average horsepower is just about the same. And so this is where, that's one thing. It is anytime you actually make power, it's going to condense your time in that power. But it also means, hey, I pulled through, I can grab the next gear. Well, what happens then? I grab the next gear earlier and it pulls this next gear harder than it would have before. It actually means you're physically moving faster. which then opens up what we talk about the rider, the physiology, the capabilities. Some kids are just not capable of going faster. So what they're going to do is you give them more horsepower and they just hang that gear out, go to the speed they're comfortable to, and then they don't grab the next gear to continue their velocity. And maybe that's suspension, right? Okay. Now he's going into the braking bump section 3 miles an hour faster than he would have had he been on his non-mod bike, because not because the stock bike also couldn't do that, but because he didn't shift or whatever, right? Because that's as fast as he knows how to go through the bumps, or that's how fast the suspension can go through the bumps, or the combination thereof, or how fast his brain and his nutrition and his rest and all these things that you talk about.
Well, and you just hit the nail on the head. For those of you who this might be your first show with us, we've talked about the idea that your brain's ability to process speed is directly related to the blood sugar storage levels in your liver. And every time I do a performance camp, I always talk about the idea that everybody wants to be quicker and doesn't realize that if you have unstabilized blood sugar, your brain's going to use that little left foot of yours to downshift the bike to where the process and input speed is comfortable. That's what you just named it as, Derek. So I'll reiterate it, right? You get comfortable, even though you've gone past the acceleration curve, it's flattening, it's coming down. That's where they're comfortable. That's where they stay. And that little left foot, every time you downshift, you're slowing the bike down. Anybody who's listening to this, who I've had the privilege of having a performance camp with, what do we talk about? You should be either accelerating or decelerating everywhere around the track, nowhere in between. So, Derek, you bring up something that I think is one of the most controversial subjects that I deal with as a physiologist. I'm always, anybody who's been to one of my performance camps, you'll see me on the side of the track doing this: shift your damn dirt bike, right? Because it's making a ton of noise. And you can see they've accelerated and they've hit a point that the motor's decelerating. You've educated us in previous shows here. Once you get to that point, the bike is slowing down. How would you encourage either a rider who's listening and or a parent? How do you teach it? Selfishly for me, I'm like, go ride a two-stroke. You'll figure out. In fact, go get a 1981 full floater.
Yeah.
Get one where when it goes off the pipe, you can get off the bike and push it faster than it's going to accelerate, because you've got that little window. And if you miss it, it's a stink bug. How would you encourage, especially with nowadays, and we've even teased about this, look at these 85s with 16 inches of travel and put out as much horsepower as an 81 125, and kids say the bike's slow and doesn't handle well. And I'm like, there's more technology in that than Bailey's RC 500. Come on, you can't go there, but the kids can't relate to that. In today's day and age, how would you recommend a rider or a parent teach that sweet spot?
We're working on a product. I thought I had this 2 years ago, and unfortunately I've been struggling with it, which is a shift light indicator. So, hey,
yes,
that would be great, right?
Yes.
If you throw it on the bike, it's good. Now, if they go fuel injection, this is kind of easy on, but we already kind of have that with Git. There's a product that already exists for that. But on the two strokes that don't have an ECU that's outputting an RPM signal, right? This becomes where we have to make our own RPM signal. No big deal, but we've had some struggles with it. And again, it's not really who I am as a person. That's not my forte. So having to get help. And then of course having to get affordable help. I'm sure there's some kid who's doing like robotics right now in high school that's like, Derek, you're an idiot. Like, this is easy. You know? So and if you are one of those kids, you want to
contact Derek,
solve this problem, hit me up. I would love to have it. So
we'll give you a part of the company. We promise.
Right. And what I really want, like, I'm not kidding when I say this from a training aid. So you heard it here first. Maybe somebody will beat me to the punch, is I want for a training aid, a damn horn or some shit, like a fucking train horn. And you go, you know, and the kid's out there and all you hear is honk, honk every time the thing needs to shift, right?
Yeah.
And I think from a training perspective, something like that would be very useful, where both the dad and the kid, you know, from the side of the track can be like, hey, son of a gun, you know, that guy is more than I thought. And as dads, you would be shocked. The sound of a two-stroke at peak horsepower is kind of what I describe. I mean, this is not exactly accurate, but it's really close. Have you ever heard the Cobra 50s when they leave the line and you think they're lugging and they're going, wah, and then all of a sudden they start going, wah, they sound awesome. That wah, that's actually usually clutched really close to where peak horsepower RPM is. They just don't sound good right there. Yeah. But that's actually where on a 125 and 85, that kind of almost lugging sound where the bike is pulling, but it doesn't sound really great. That's typically where the bike's doing its best work. And so you should be always telling your kid, hey, if you grab that next gear and it pulls it, you should be doing that more frequently, right? And so you can work on that on straightaways. You can say, all right, let's go do a drag race down the road. Now we do this all the time and I win every single time because I'm good at starts and I also understand the concepts, right? So like I know what's going on and then I implement it. But when I was young, I was good at this. If I go drag race some kid and he's got a 125 and he's got two of them, and I say, all right, I weigh more than you, I'm still going to kick your ass. I always talk.
Sure. Big
First time I
talker.
pretty much always win because every kid is used to screaming these out to like what they hear and hear on the track. But when you're purely talking about acceleration and you're on the road, there's no traction components, right? There's no bumps, there's no nothing. It's just about horsepower and timing your
Mm-hmm.
shifts. Well, basically, you're tap dancing on that shifter on the street. So if I go from second gear, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, it's like what? That's about how fast it happens, right? So it's
Yeah.
gonna be longer each gear, but like second to third is like that.
Boom.
Third to
Yeah.
fourth is like that. And what they'll learn is in that first time they drag race, they'll slightly over rev. Like so you'll drag and I can't show it on, but one will get ahead and
Yeah.
they're trying, oh, I'm behind. Let me rev a little more. And then they'll over rev and you click the next gear and you pull a further away. And now because they're over revved and then they grab their next gear, they're already beyond the power. They don't get another good pull. And then they got to shift shit and they lost the race.
Are
So
they beyond the power or behind the power?
So if they rev too far, right,
Yep.
they're over this crossover point. And so if we ride, let's say the hump is right here, the good part of it. And if
Yeah.
you ride here to here, then shift, and then here to here and shift, you get the most average power. But if I ride here where the power fell down, when it shifts back to here. It doesn't actually climb back up the power curve.
Gotcha.
You're so far over revved that you went from 10 horsepower in over rev, which is terrible, to 20, which is better than 10, but still terrible, where that bike's actually making 30 or 40, whatever bike we're talking about. You never actually got the bike into the horsepower. You revved it so far that when you shifted the next gear, it was able to go more more mile an hour because we're in the next gear, but you only moved it from 10 up the curve to 20 when you needed to shift over here and move it up back to the 30 part of the curve, right? So the first time you drag race a bike, you see kids do this every time where they over rev and they get smoked. And there's no winning the drag race after you've gotten up. When you get a bike length on a guy, you win.
Mm-hmm.
The next time they're usually better. And then the third time, now it's an even race because they can visually see when they don't shift right. And I always say it's a race to who can shift the fastest at the perfect timing. Like you would much rather shift slightly too early than shift slightly too late. The penalty is way worse to be on too far side, but kids ride the bikes the other way around this. And it's a combination of, all right, I hit this jump at the top of third. So all the way up to this jump, there's no way in the world I would ever click to fourth and then slow down for this jump.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's kind of how that works. Or coming into this braking bumps, I'm really only comfortable going this speed. So why the heck would I grab another gear, get up to a speed I'm uncomfortable with, and then have to slow down earlier, right? Our goals when we teach, slowing down, a lot of times you're like, hey, you got to slow down as late as you can at this braking point. But sometimes that's not really the case. Let's just say, for example, the bumps are big, and your suspension has a certain limit to it. You can only go through this bump at a peak speed of this section of 20 miles an hour, right? Like that's what your bike's capable of and your skill level and all that. So kids oftentimes will just limit themselves to that 20 the entire straightaway instead of saying, nope, I'm going to try to get to 25. And then I still got to slow down before the bumps to 20. And then I'm going to hit the bump. But that's going to be faster than if I only go 20 miles an hour all the way down that straightaway. So a lot of kids limit their ability to go faster by just not shifting. And then as a byproduct of it, you don't make use of the extra horsepower that your potential mod bike might have. I mean, that's why at Loretta's, yes, KTM's dominant as a group, KTM Husky Gas. There are no Yamaha 85s out there other than sponsored kids, essentially, or kids that have, for the most part. But there are kids on those bikes who are competitive, right? Who can do well. Are they as good? In my opinion, no, they're not. Do they make as much average horsepower? In my opinion, no, they don't. Can you mod one to be close? In my opinion, nah. Like you could get close, but not there. But most kids don't maximize their usage of all the power that their bike has. So then a kid who needs more horsepower and, tap dances on that shifter better and gets more out of his slower bike, he's able to be a little bit more competitive. And that's an example, like for a dad, if you think you're getting beat because of horsepower, how much more power do you think your competition has?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, I mean, how much do you think's on the table? Oh, some factory bike has limitless horsepower. Well, number one, I know that to be not true. But number two, do if I were to give your son, I'll give you a good example. That Reese Seba kid, we've talked about him. I really think the kid's great. Think the dad's nice. And hopefully we can work something down the road with the kid to continue to, help his success. He won mini senior this year on 85, one of the classes, one or two, and he got second in the other one, right? Top kid, tons of starts, good kid. Went to Ponca And I had talked to his dad. They came down to the shop from the Texas SMX rounds. We did some dyno work on a bike and just check some stuff out. They've got a good guy doing their engines named Randy at RJR. Super, super nice guy. And so we did a little testing and got some tuning on ECUs and stuff that we were supporting him on ECUs for Loretta's this year and then on Super Mini. So we did some testing to fine tune that for his bike. And his 112 was really fast, very good belt, very, very good bike. But the disparity between that and his 85 was huge. You know, I mean, it's a 112, right? We're not talking the same bike. And I was like, you know, in my opinion, you should transition him from now to a 105. Do that transition for a bit. Don't just put him on this rocket ship because then he's going to get used to this power and maybe be lazy.
Yep.
Let's put him on this 105 for a period of time. And I guarantee you can be competitive at races on it. And his dad's like, well, so they went to Ponca and they did it. They raced the 105. And if you go look at his results, I think he pulled a couple hole shots. I think he won a moto, but I know he's podium. And I think he got some podium overalls. I think he just missed out on the first place overall. I think he got second or third, but did really well. If you go look at the class, the kids were, you know, top 5, top 6 were all shook up. But he did it on a 105. Now, that's not an excuse. He didn't really need the 112.
It validates your point.
Absolutely. And so if you're another dad out there and you're like, oh, we need more horsepower, I'm telling you right now that he was on a 105 that is a very good running 105. But I can also tell you that his own personal 112 is considerably better than that 105. Right. So it's if you think that the difference between your kid and Reese was the fact that you were down on horsepower, odds are you weren't. Right. You were probably better than him. If you have a good 112, you were probably better than he was, but he was able to come in if he beat you, right? The other kids beat him, but there was, you know, basically 30, 40 other kids that didn't beat him. Yeah. So it's not always about horsepower. And that's the thing that people don't get. It's about how your kid maximizes the power you have. And that comes with, like you said, how do you do that? Well, go on the road, get you and another kid that's the same weight. If you have 2 bikes and let them switch between the bikes and I say the road, you know what I'm saying? Somewhere safe, whatever.
In a field somewhere
with helmets and gear and whatever. And go roll race and teach your kid how to do this and start at different RPMs and start different techniques and different shift points and let the kids figure it out. And they will very, very, very quickly, because they're smart. They want to win. They're going to be like, oh, wow. And they're going to realize how quickly they shift. Then you need to start bringing that to the track. And we got to listen. What does that bike sound like when he's on the money and he's winning these roll races? Where is he shifting at? Okay, now our starts need to sound like that. Now down the straightaways need to sound like that. Now when he's coming up to a jump that he needs max jump on, our bike needs to sound like that. That's the gear ratio he needs to pick. And it's the most basic of things. But in motocross, we very rarely just drag race somebody, right? We think we do on the track, but there's bumps and dirt and body position shifting it, right? So go learn that fundamental and then apply it to your racetrack.
You brought up the device that shows them when to shift gears. We're working on a project right now where we want to be able, as you're looking out, right? We want on the bottom of the visor to have a yellow to red, or I guess it'd be a green to red. So as it goes closer and closer to red, it actually represents your heart rate relevant to the motorcycle.
That'd be awesome. We could do the same with gears. Yep.
And to me, that would be the perfect combination because, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because you're the engineer and I'm not. If you ride the bike in its ideal sweet spot, does that not make the suspension work better? Because we've talked a lot in the previous shows that as the RPMs get progressively higher, let's say it goes outside that sweet spot and goes into the fall off spot, but the bike's screaming on a radar gun, it's decelerating, but we won't go there yet. Is that not stiffening the rear end?
I personally don't know this answer enough. Okay. I'd have to do a little bit of, I think personally, my personal understanding of why you want to be at a lower RPM is combination of torque at the rear tire. So how much torque are we putting out? And then number 2, I think the inertia effects, people overlook this all the time, but inertia effects should not be overlooked. When you take a gyroscope and you spin it up, I mean, we've all played with the tops, right? Or something like that. A kid spun a dime or a quarter and you can see that, but a top, I mean, which is what was a top weigh back when they used to, you probably had those. They weigh nothing, right?
2-3 ounces.
And you're only spinning them up like, I'm assuming a couple thousand RPM. I haven't even thought about it, but it's not very many. Let's say it's 1,000, 2,000, whatever you get. Have you ever tried to move those? Or you take one of those you hold in your hand?
Super hard.
Super hard, right?
Yep.
Well, your dirt bike has a crankshaft in it. I probably have, here's one. This is where we do like crank and engine assembly. And this thing weighs 5 pounds maybe. And it's like gyroscope, like and then it's turning upwards of 15, 16,000 RPM on a 85 at peak RPM. So if you're screamed out, you have this gyroscope that is moving really, really fast that absolutely will not change directions, right? It doesn't want to, and it will, but it doesn't want to. And when it does, it actually creates weird counterforces that that's actually how whips work. You know how whips like whip crazy and come back?
Yep.
It's actually a
Yep.
gyroscope. Imagine if you threw a gyroscope and you tickle it, right? You see those, and they come back. Well, that's what's happening. It's in riders, we don't know that, right? We just do it and the bike just does it. But
Yeah.
it's one of those really weird oddities. So I do believe that the gyroscopic effect just tightens this bike up and makes it not want to change direction and makes it. And then the other part is on a 450 in particular, letting it lug and not having all this torque at your disposal. When you blip or touch the throttle and all of a sudden you've got all this horsepower, that actually extends the rear tire on most motorcycles. And on some bikes, depending where you're in the travel, there's like there's a relationship between the chain and your sprocket location and then where your rear end is and then the angle of the swing arm. So if the swing arm is kind of like flattish to down, like full extension, and you hit the gas, your rear tire actually extends. Most people think your bike squats, but it actually extends under power. But if you get deep enough in the stroke where the swing arm starts to get tilted up, horsepower actually makes it compress. It just depends where that
Angle
line of
is.
drive is with the chain. So it's really complicated. Well, if you're under torque, if you're under load, it's going to make your rear shock stiffer. If you're near, if you're kind of near sag point or full extension. And then if you're really deep in a bump, it will make it softer, right? So anytime you're applying horsepower through bumps, it's having an effect on your suspension, like to your point. And then you have to, take that into. Now, there's times where you can take advantage of it. There's times where you can't. So, for example, a huge kicker bump is going to bottom my bike out. Let me just tickle the throttle. It extends the rear tire. I stiffen my rear shock. Okay, great. But then if I got these like real bad chatter bumps and they're just jarring the hell out of you and you're on the gas really hard and you're accelerating hard, which is everybody's complaint on practically every motorcycle. Well, the harder you're on the gas, the worse those chatter bumps are going to get because that chain force, which is independent of your suspension has no effect on your chain force, right? The more horsepower you put down, the stiffer those bumps are going to get. So that's an example where maybe a little lower RPM, letting the bike lug. And then guess what happens when we have lug and less power? We get traction. Our rear tire is able to follow the ground. And we can get actually a faster lap time because we got better drive out of the corner. Putting down all your horsepower all the time isn't always the answer. And if you look at a top fuel car, yes, they're the fastest cars on the planet. Yes, they have 12,000 horsepower. But the real management of that car is the clutching strategies to get that horsepower down to the ground and not spin the tire. Because we all see a top fuel car leave the line, blow the tires up in smoke and go nowhere, or they get tire shake or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Same thing. There's a time and a place for the horsepower you have. And learning to lug your bike and learning to, use these things at your disposal. Because, for example, let's say you're high up in the RPMs and you're only partial throttle. Okay, I'm not using all the power, but I'm way up in the RPMs. But a tiny change in that throttle position is a big change in your horsepower. So now I'm trying to get traction and I'm the guy trying to feather this, power out. And I'm going from quarter throttle to half throttle is like a 10 or 15 horsepower change. You can never hook up that way. And then think about it. Your hands are getting jarred and the bike's getting jarred. Whereas if I let that RPM lug and the difference between quarter and a half is 2 horsepower. All right, now I can get the rear tire to hook up. Now I can get the bike to drive through the rut. And then when I do need the power, well, there's a clutch. Flick the clutch, get the RPMs up, and let's go, right? And then also, if I'm lower in the RPM range, now my bike has room to go down that straightaway. If I'm already wrapped out, well, now I'm going to have to click a gear, and then I got other stuff coming up, right? So to me, that's always it's a great question. I think the more you study suspension, the more you study horsepower effects and torque effects on the suspension, it gets really complicated. But I think like you said, ultimately, however we've got to this conclusion, a little bit lower RPM and sometimes less application of power will make the rear end and the bike free up tremendously. Plus the gyroscope effect goes way down. So if you're on a 450, very noticeable because those cranks are twice the weight of that crank I showed you, which is a 125 crank. And those things have a ton of gyroscope. And so that's something that, anybody who's ridden one will say, if 450 feels heavier than a 250F, go look at the spec sheet. Well, KTM 450 and 250F are like this within a pound or two of each other. So it shouldn't feel heavier.
You bring up two things. Number one, when the RPMs are lower, I think most of the people listening would recognize you're in a better part of the torque curve. And I think Jet exemplifies that. How many times do you see him just, he just blips and pops over something, or he's able to manual something so easily. The other side of it is, and you're bringing up something that I won't say I get a lot of pushback at performance camps, but I get a lot of pushback at performance camps. When you were mentioning, let's say you're on a real dry blue groove, I don't think, once again, that there's not 9 out of our 10 listeners would agree with us with the idea that, hey, if you're in, let's just say you're on a 125 and you're in second gear and you're on a blue groove flat corner and you hammer the throttle, nobody would be surprised that it's going to skirt out from underneath you, skate out from underneath you, right? Well, why is that? And my point is everybody would agree, hey, if it's blue groove, there's not much of a rut and it's slippery, lug it a little bit and let it get traction. But then when the conditions are, I call them lazy conditions, where now you just take all laws of physics and you just disband them. You're like, doesn't matter, right? The bike's screaming, we're bouncing off the rev limiter, there's dirt flying everywhere, it sounds cool, looks cool, but you're not going fast. But yet everybody will come to a performance camp thinking, I'm going to get faster. And I show them how to get faster. And I go, okay, are you in a position that you can manage the speed that we created? That's where the physical comes in. But I want to come back to what you were saying earlier. Isn't it interesting when the conditions require us to be very finesse with the throttle, right? Good throttle control. You hear that all the time. Well, when is there a time that you shouldn't have good throttle control? I don't think ever. You should always have good throttle control. What's your thoughts on that?
I agree with you. I will. The internet's full of a bunch of opinions, right? And they all
Mm-hmm.
have equal loudness and voice and strength behind them for the most part, right?
Yeah.
So everybody has an opinion and their opinion is great to them. Tomac is an example of an individual that, in general, versus Kinney, versus Chase, versus Jet, has bad throttle control. He has been on record, and him and his dad have talked about how their version of throttle control is the clutch. We want you to turn that throttle all the way, all the time, because we want to have the opportunity to get the most power down to the ground. And then we want you to modulate that power by slipping the clutch and taking power away. To me, he's been very successful, so that's great for him. But at the same time, I would never coach this to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I like the Kinney approach. I like the Chase approach. I like the Jet approach. And back in the day, the Dungey approach. And realistically, even James Stewart.
Mm-hmm.
Jade, his dad was very open about, yeah, we never used clutches on 125s. We didn't have the money, so we didn't use them. And if you watch pictures of him, which was a bad habit ultimately, there's pictures of him on that 125 winning outdoor national championships, and his hands are not even out on the clutch, full all
Mm-hmm.
hand around, which is mind blowing, right? I mean, that was incredible. Now, why could he do it? Well, that son of a gun could corner like nobody's business. And so his corner speed was so high, he never had to touch the clutch. Like he just
Exactly.
didn't need it. But tell that to a modern kid today who's on an 85 or a 125 and like, oh, it's impossible to ride this bike. It's a two-stroke. You got to have the clutch. And it's like, no, actually, modern two-strokes have the widest power you've ever had in your life. And you totally could ride it without the clutch if you tap danced on that shift box and carried your speed and made the right selections. That would be a drill that I think a lot of kids and parents would be good to do, because then it teaches you throttle control. I
Mm-hmm.
think relying on that clutch is I call it like a crutch. Your clutch is a crutch. Every time you use it, you're doing something wrong. And there's a lot of reasons. You've probably seen it in your camps. Oh, I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to get a little wheel spin. Let me flick this clutch. Well, then what happens to the RPMs? They go up. We build up flywheel weight in the crank and gyroscope. And then when we let that clutch out, it's more likely to break that tire loose the next time. And then
Not
also,
to
a lot of kids
mention,
use it to turn.
not to mention, you've interrupted the transition from acceleration. You threw in a pause because
Yep.
you pulled the clutch in. Now you get the forward momentum. Now you end up throwing the balance of the bike off. And to your point, then you drop the clutch. It's just
Yeah,
constant
it's terrible.
misinformation and input to the bike.
Right. Now, I don't mean to rag on Tomac. If he hears this, he's clearly one of the world's best at any
He's
given
he's
time.
done
He's
he's done
probably,
okay.
yeah, he's
He's
probably
done okay.
been the best at various times, right? So it's not that you couldn't make it successful. And I'd be willing to bet big money that if you really track his data, there's times where he has incredible throttle control,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like he's very good at that. It's not a skill he doesn't have, but they also have at their disposal the ability to change clutches every moto, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, nope. And every team does that. They change clutches all the time, but you and I and most amateurs, that's not in your program.
Well, and that's
So,
what this show's about is, okay, here's the ideal world if
yep.
clutch baskets weren't an issue. But for the rest of us, where's the happy medium between creating momentum and still, you bring up something that, not to go back to performance camps, but inevitably it always comes up. It's always amazing to me how people say they want to improve their corner speed. And they always, if you're looking, let's say you're going down a straightaway, hard inside is lane one, middle is two, and outside is three. How they'll come in lane one and then they'll make the arc a 4-point turn or at least a 3-point turn. And if you go back and watch 90% of James's corners, where does he come in from? He's normally coming in from lane 3, comes across the braking bumps, butters the inside of lane 1, and then drifts back out to lane 3. To your point, carrying momentum on a 2-stroke, not using the clutch. You come in on the inside and you have to square it off twice, sometimes 3 times. You've just lost all your momentum. Now, here's adding more insult to injury. You come in on lane 1 and you see this, no disrespect to amateurs, but you see those big G outs and you end up with 3 of them in a corner. There's visual evidence of what you're doing wrong.
Yeah, like it got formed that way.
It got formed that way because you came in, you lost all your acceleration because you G'd out, you hammer the clutch, so you create a G out and an acceleration. Then you go to the next middle, apex, you do it again, and then there's one on the exit. Now take it one step further. Every time you pull the clutch in, the bike wants to stand up in every single corner because it's lost its input. It has no brake to slow it down and has no gas pushing it. The bike will always stand up when in doubt. Watch the PW50 class. They're a bunch of weeble wobbles because they're on the gas, off the gas. And I try to, when you watch James, goes way outside, comes across the braking bumps for obvious reasons, carries momentum for obvious reasons, doesn't make a corner a 4-point turn for obvious reasons, and very rarely has to use a clutch.
Well, a great example, like to what you're talking about, is if the correct way to hit a corner fast is the faster your entry speed is, and the less power we need to apply coming out of the corner, the better that corner will be. So there's a limit. That limit would be ultimately, from a physics standpoint, how far we can lean the bike over, the rut, how far it's leaned over, all those factors. But if the lean angle's there in the rut and you can get it cranked over far enough for the physics to work, the reason you have to lean over, obviously, is there's a mass counteracting your turning. So you have to counteract that with the lean, and all that balances out. That's what balances. But the faster you can enter the corner and the less throttle you can use through the corner, the faster you'll be. Sometimes that needs to be steady throttle, like on a 4-stroke, especially because they have engine braking. So it needs to be some power application, essentially net zero, but something. But if you come in really, really good in a perfect world, there's some drills that people do with this where they basically come in, pull your clutch in, and try to coast through this corner as fast as you can to get used to commitment, which is, hey, you got to lean over early, coming into this corner, lean over, come in with speed, get through the corner, and then apply gas on the way out. But if you think of it from the tire standpoint, if we have 0 through 10 levels of traction, and all of that traction gets used up for the cornering aspect, well, I can't use any of it for throttle or for brake, right? So anytime you apply throttle, we're essentially taking some component away from our cornering traction and applying it to drive traction, right? To go traction. Now there's a balance there. The more you lean over, the less you lean over, right? That's why riders, they figure that out. But going from no gas to clutched and lots of gas, and right, you're totally disrupting this traction component we had for the corner. And then, like you said, there's a lot of physics going on when you hit gas, don't hit gas. It's going to want to stand up, not stand up, right? All those factors. So 100% there. But yeah, backing all the way up, does horsepower matter? Yep. But your kid applying the best application of that power has a bigger relevancy to your success as an amateur than anything else. And I think we talked it on the show, but like, you would be shocked about how fast really fast guys can go on bone stock bikes.
Exactly. Totally agree.
Like the fastest kids at Loretta's on bone stock bikes would still be in the top 5. And parents cannot believe this. And I'm talking stock suspension. The kid would probably come back and bitch and moan about it. But he's still capable of doing it, because what's he going to do? He's going to go get the most out of that bike. He's going to find the limit of that suspension, and then he'll just stick at that spot. Okay, I can't charge that bump that hard. Okay, I'm not going to. Right. But I can go really hard everywhere else.
Make it somewhere else. Exactly.
Right. And that's that's what these guys do good. And the fact, I mean, if you know engines at all, we can all agree that as good as James Stewart's 125 was, and this is getting, for some of these parents that didn't follow James Stewart, but as good as that bike was as a factory Kawasaki 125, it was nowhere near as good as the 4-strokes he was racing in that era. I mean, probably off on peak horsepower by 3 or 4. And then more importantly, off on like its average width of power by an average of probably 6, 7, 8 horsepower. And yet this guy was winning motos by 30 seconds and crushing people and couldn't come from behind, never got whole shots that year because the bike wasn't fast enough. And it was an amazing bike. But if you thought that the bike was everything, he just proved that wrong to every single individual at the absolute pinnacle of their careers, right? These are the best of the best in the world. And he's being able to beat them on a bike that was awesome, but certainly subpar. And had he got the opportunity to race the same year, he probably had the opportunity, but it wasn't quite developed. Had the four stroke been full blown Mitch Payton PC ready to go 06, 07, 08, like the bike that RV got to get, James would have just crushed the competition by numbers that would have been unbelievable, because he was the jet of that era, right? He was that good. So,
Totally agree.
I talked to, I don't think they would mind. I won't say who, but I talked to an elite pro, was on an elite factory program on the 250 side. They won more than one championship. They won one or two championships. So this is the individual we're talking about, like
As
a
a
elite
pro,
person. And they're still a pro today, and they're still one of the best today, right?
but
They're
they
a
won
title
two.
winner.
They
Like,
won two as amateurs.
Say it again.
You said they won two as amateurs,
No,
and
no,
they're now
I
pro.
don't know how many titles they won as amateur, to be honest. But they won
Okay,
a 250 pro
gotcha.
title, and then they, I
Okay,
think, one or two, and then they've won 450 titles. So
okay.
they're top person, right?
Yep.
They, one of the years was a transition in models of bikes for the company, and the team they were on, any new bike is hard to figure out. And so it was a big change, right? It wasn't like a little change. It was like a whole new bike. They said that when I talked to them, they said the bike that year was so horrible. Like they couldn't believe, like the previous bike was awesome. Like they had really gotten it figured out. New motor comes out, new bike, new chassis, new platform. And stock bike was okay, but it was stock, right? It's like, yeah, that's what I remember from the stock bike of the old bike, maybe a little better. But when it came down to brass tacks, the mod bike was really bad. And they didn't know just how bad. He won some races on it that year and did pretty well, but they were struggling, right? And so they're like, we think we're at a power disadvantage. And anyway, they go ride a stock bike the next year for press release. And he comes in and he's telling the individual, like, hey, this bike's way better than my race bike. And they're like, there's no way, dude. No, this bike is considerably better than my race bike. So they go test. They're like, all right, well, bring the stock one and let's go do lap times. And sure enough, he was faster on the stock bike. And here's a guy who won races at the pro level on this other bike. And so
Yep.
they did a lot of development the next year. And of course, things got a lot better and yada, yada, yada. But at the end of the day, at the elite level, here's a guy who's on a bike that arguably, like, in their opinion, was worse than the stock one, and he's still winning outdoor nationals. So,
Yeah.
and I think Supercross races that year. So at the end of the day, it's not, I'm talking myself out of a job, but it's not as relevant or as important as people want to believe that it is.
I want to elaborate on what you just said there at the very end, but give me just a half second. Every time we come up to a subject like this, I always think back to O'Mara had the Honda. At that time, they said, oh, it handled beautifully. Then you had the Suzuki that had the best suspension with the full floater, but didn't have the power that the Honda had. And then you had Jeff Ward somewhere in the between that with the Unitrack, and wasn't the fastest bike, wasn't the slowest bike, but he's got an extended contract with Cowie, and he's going to ride that bike's wheels off and try to win on it. Didn't complain about it, realizing he might not be as well suspended or may not be as fast as the other bikes. And I always think about that generation, Bob Hanna, knowing that he never wanted to do any welding. I think he'd ride anything that you would give him versus making him go back to welding, right?
Yeah.
And it just generation wise, it seemed like those guys, they just rode, but they were contracted to ride. And even if you realize you were maybe bringing a rubber knife to a gunfight, they still gave so much effort and didn't blame the bike. They're like, yeah, I didn't win today.
I knew Kent Howerton is in our area, and I knew him okay. I'm not going to say I knew him really well, but
Yeah.
I knew him okay. And we had a chat one time. Actually, last time I've seen him in person, actually, and it's been a while. He's really not doing well health wise. So anyway, he won on a Husqvarna, won an outdoor national championship on a Husqvarna
With a metal Husqvarna tank, right?
Yeah,
Metal?
yeah, and he hadn't rode any other bikes back then. They were loyal to a fault. You rode your bikes and you did your job, and whatever. So he wins an outdoor national championship. I think it was versus Hannah, right? If I remember right, because those two hate each other.
Oh yeah.
And wins. So these next years on Cowie, I believe. I'm not for sure on that. You would know. But anyway, he was telling me a story about, the bike wasn't the best at the time. And Husqvarna was kind of on their way out. And the Japanese were kind of on the climb up. And of course, they were nowhere near the Hondas, but whatever. I forget what bike he rides next. Yamaha, Cowie. I think it was a Cowie because he ended up on Cowie. But he said he could not believe how good the motorcycle was when he got off the Husky and, gets on this other bike. He's like, they've been on that. And then he's like, wait a second, that's the stock one. He's like,
Yeah.
they've been on what? But he still won an outdoor national championship. And yeah, it's a different era. And we're, talking about things that people would say, oh, it's different.
It's all relevant.
Different.
No, it's all relevant.
It's all relative to the time.
Was that when he went to Suzuki and was teammates with Bomber?
Probably, yeah, the next year. So he was
because
just
they
like,
were
I
both
could
full
not
floater,
believe.
and
Yeah.
that full floater was like next level for everybody who
And
rode it.
even the motor, like the Husqvarna was just way behind the times at that point.
It was still an
Um,
enduro motor, wasn't it, for the
yeah, it
most
was
part?
terrible. He said that, and guess
Heavy.
what his championship bonus was? He got no,
Uh,
he made no money from that deal, which is, yeah, I wish he could share this story to this day, but I
yeah.
think he got like a chainsaw.
Oh, that's so bad. It's funny, but it's so funny. It's not, you know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah.
It's
And then
like, wow.
he had at some point he ended up on Cowie, and there's some person in the area. I probably should not say this, but they ended up with a replica Kent Howerton Works 500,
Okay.
a replica.
Yep.
Those bikes were, crushed and destroyed,
Yeah.
and so I was looking at it over one day, and I could not believe, like I didn't grow up in that era, right?
Hmm.
The triple clamps are hand welded. We're not
Yeah.
talking about a billet triple clamp. You're talking about
No.
some guy machined a tube, and then he took some square tubing and put it
Yeah.
at an angle at the certain offset, and then and back then it was probably oxyacetylene welded, and
Yep.
TIG welded or welded it on, and then the top clamp and whatever they wanted, right? And I'm looking at that going, how does that not warp? How does it stay in place? How is this
Hmm.
functional? But then my brain was like, that's how things got done back then.
Yeah.
You didn't have these CNC machines available to everybody. If you wanted to make something, you made it. And the frame was all one off. The motor was literally sand cast, super cool bike, and it was water cooled. They never sold that, right? This was pre KX 500. I don't remember. I think it was a four.
Mm.
What did they sell pre 500?
Was it? Well, it was a YZ 490, RM 465
This would have been the air cooled era of the 500 somehow, and it was a
before
water
the
cooled
KX
version of it.
500.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was
Okay.
pre. So it was because the cylinder was sand cast, had
Wow.
welded bungs for the coolant, right? Like they welded this coolant system on the bike, had a
Yeah.
hand welded frame. It was so cool.
Mm.
But they rode the shit out of those things. And I'll tell you
Yeah.
right now, I would not jump that bike. Like, nah, my life's not worth riding that thing. And they freaking raced the shit out of them, right? So
Yeah.
when you hear about things today with these riders bitch about, and you're like, yes, I understand you're at that chasing the 1%, but trust me, there's some dude out there who can make that work. You know what I mean? And I think Chase Sexton learned that the hard way this year. I think this next year, this coming year, he's going to be great. But I think he learned the hard way that this Honda that was a piece of crap, in his opinion, maybe was not so bad. And when he went to that KTM and the grass was supposed to be greener, and of course, it's like dating a new chick, right? KTM's like selling them on all the allure. We got all this facility. Look at us, look at us, look at us. And he got there and probably, and I'm just guessing, was like, okay.
Not so much.
No, I still got to
Yeah.
work, right? I still got to make things work.
Well, in the part that always blows my mind, and this is for those that are listening with us, thank you so much for sticking around. This is something that I'm always amazed with. Go back to when McGrath was dominating, and then they just said, all right, here's this one piece monarch frame, and you're going to race it. And he's like, that thing's a tuning fork. That thing's horrible. That thing threw him to the ground. And you think, and I understand engineering, and they're always, what are they, 3, 4, 5 years ahead on R&D. I mean, the things they're developing now is literally 4 or 5 years ahead of its time. But to your point earlier, why would you go from, like you were saying, the guy's completely stone stock bike the next year was better than his previous year's race bike? Like, how can it just, and I know people are going to say, well, you don't understand the way the engineering world works. I don't understand it at the zeros and ones level, but when you make such a dramatic change, and we're fortunate, we've got people like Tedesco. I think Tedesco is doing Triumph, right? And then you've got Brock Tickle at Cowie, and you've got all these different riders at different OEMs that are Trey Kennard at Honda doing something probably 2-3 years out. But that's not a new thing that they just introduced in 2024. And I'm always surprised at how big the contrast are in the bikes. And then, especially when they go the wrong direction, like, why would you still push it out? I know there's
Well,
all
the Triumph, you
those.
hit this up with Triumph that's interesting, which is I actually think the reason their bike came out immediately successful is because the feedback from the magazines is fantastic. You have a
Mm-hmm,
bike that has a great do-it-all chassis, according to the magazines. You
mm-hmm,
have KYB suspension. They just said, you know what? We're not going to fight the market. We're going to go join the best in the market. And we're going to get it. And then you have an engine that, I mean, I've been into one. I have one here. It's a KTM essentially with Triumph's touches on it. But I mean, they started with that. And now, but they did make enough tweaks within the engine. I'm talking like, I'm working on a YouTube video for this because I think it's cool to me. But what some of the changes they made there, it's like, okay, you pretty much could do those changes to the KTM. It would take some work, but you could do it. And we're not talking big parts or pieces. They're actually talking little nuanced things that are hard to do. Like, for example, one of the changes in the Triumph is they have a very tiny exhaust outlet diameter off the head. And so actually, this is something that I've been working on. And so like this diameter here, this would be like a cylinder port without the head around it.
Yeah.
This outlet right here is smaller on the Triumph than it is on the KTM, not by a little bit, by a lot. And that's something that I think gives it the engine character they were chasing for. But what I'm getting to is they went and got Tedesco, and they have Ricky, and they have, I'm assuming, other test guys, but they really went and got like a focus crew of guys and then said, hey, here's all the other brands and bikes. Go compare them. And then they did, and they worked hard at it and came up with a good bike. And I think that's an example where when you don't get too big and you don't get too corporate, you can end up with a really great end product because you take really good feedback from very good test riders, right? And it's not too much the mishmash. I think one of the and I think Yamaha's obviously got this sorted out somehow. They're just crushing reviews on chassis and frame and motor and all these factors. But when you're like Honda, that's just been in the weeds for such a long time on the consumer side, like they haven't been winning shootouts. I almost feel like, and like you said, they have good test riders, but that's only one voice they listen to. And then they have whoever else their novice test rider is and their beginner test rider, and right. And then there's so much more on the back end we don't know about, from like, well, if we do this frame, it might break at 200 hours. We're not doing it. Right. Or, whatever it is. Right.
Sure.
I think they just got so big that and then like you said, Honda's working 3, 4, 5, 6 years out. And I've heard rumors that they have 8 years out. So whatever will come out up to like 6, 7 years from today is already done. And then what's going to be, 7, 8 years from today is currently what the R&D project, the development team's working on, right? So they're looking way out. Maybe that's the problem. Whereas a company like Triumph is like, well, we have a goal, but we may not hit this goal. And we're just going to work. Okay, this is great. I don't know. I mean, that's a good question, right? But I do think that it's just because they're smaller, they're more willing to adapt. So I actually don't think it should be a surprise. The surprise is the fact that they can get the bikes, the money to build the bikes, the production, all the tool making, whatever it is, the distribution, and get a product out to market. That's actually I think, the biggest financial hurdle of the industry. So I don't know. I don't really know where I was going with that, but just the fact that they are successful, I think, is a testament to their ability to test and to actually evaluate versus their competitors.
No, I think your point is really good one. And that is, if you think back to what KTM did differently when Roger first left Suzuki and went to KTM, they were still a small enough company that they could do exactly what Triumph is doing right now. Roger goes and assesses what we have to race against, takes the best of this, best of this, best of this, best of this, put it in a pot, produce it small enough that you could turn the boat pretty quickly. I think that's what you're seeing with Triumph. Hey, got a good batch of bikes out there in the last 5 years. Let's take take all the best, like you say, KYB, perfect example. If everyone says it's the best, then that's what we're going to bring in. We're not going to argue. We're going to go negotiate a KYB deal. Now, the key will be, can Triumph stay small enough, still be big enough to meet their financial objectives, but not get so overextended. And like you said, get so far out that it takes more and more progressive energy to turn the boat. Where KTM, when Roger first went there, my goodness, you'd have Roger in there on the CNC machine himself tweaking. I mean, that's what he's known for, right? He's not the guy that likes to sit in the office. He likes to be
and that
on that
alludes
CNC
to like the irony of a production bike, right? There is no chance in a Ice Cube's place in hell that the early KTMs at Dungey raced would have passed the muster of a true production bike.
No,
I'm sorry. You can go shove that where you don't sign if you think that that's true. On the flip side of that, that's how they got so good so quickly, when they decided to go all in. And who knows, right? Like on the factory editions, because they had this loophole of, we can release a factory edition, but it doesn't actually have to be released until after Supercross is practically over. Any like changes that wouldn't pass muster, like dimensionally, could just end up on the factory edition. Okay, we need this, that, the other, right? And it would pass muster that way. But I mean, do we really think that the AMA? I've already dug into this a little bit. And, Cooksey had an okay video. I actually thought he could have done better on it, but he at least illuminated light on really what the AMA is and isn't. They are not the American Motorcyclists Association, and they are not lobbying for you according to their own records. They spend $0 on that. What they are doing is helping these promoters out. They're a rule-making association, right? They're a buffer between you and the promoters. They can hand down punishment without the promoters being involved with that, stuff like that. And they write the rule book. So essentially, right? So do you really think there's some guy there who has a technical capability to slice up a frame and go look at cross sections everywhere and thicknesses everywhere? And they actually have a frame jig that can accurately measure. Because if you're Honda and let's say you made a half a degree change on something or KTM, you're just going to say, well, that's the variance of production. And who's the AMA to say, well, because then here's another thing I heard. This is actually hilarious. I don't remember where I heard this. So if the person doesn't want me to say this, I apologize. But I know it to be a fact. The teams are the teams submit the frames to the AMA and the parts. They don't go buy them, which we all know they're not going to go buy them.
Right.
But they don't even go like get your mic is dead, I think. They don't even go get a production bike that Honda at a dealership is selling.
Yeah. Yep.
They literally say, yeah. Here's our production bike for you to evaluate. Yep. So in case you want to measure us, that's the one.
That's the one. Yeah.
Yeah. That, and of course they have to submit. I think they only have to submit one, but like there has to be, however many are, it's like, come on, what a joke. But anyway,
that's just a big game. It's just a big game of charades, unfortunately.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I think the reason why it's relevant to what you're bringing up now and is relevant to this whole conversation is, and I've said this publicly and I'll reiterate it again. What you see, please don't think that you can duplicate.
You cannot.
We talked about like the deceleration, the compression braking. I try to teach these young kids all the way up to the vet riders, become better friends with the front brake. If you're not decelerating the bike with the lion's share of the front brake, you can use whatever percentage you want, 80% front, 75%, whatever you want to use. If you don't shorten the wheelbase, you're not going to get the bike. You talked about lean angles, and we talked about that a lot in our performance camps, right? A lot of people are like, oh, well, I've got to take the shortest line around the track. Well, that sounds great on paper until you make that corner, unfortunately, a 2 or a 3-point turn, as we said earlier. You jump into my wheelhouse, every time that bike compresses and then decompresses, what do they say in the law of physics? For every action, there's an equal and equivalent to reaction. So if your quadriceps from your knees to your hips are the largest consumer of oxygen, why don't we try to avoid using that muscle? I know that's a very absurd comment.
On that physiological side, what you're talking about there, using too much energy in your legs, unnecessarily standing and sitting costs you a tremendous energy, cost. I mean, just go do a squat with some weight or go lift some barbells with your biceps.
Just do an air squat. Watching this, just do 25 air squats.
Windage is way different, right? And so, to your point, like you're saying, I think you're just saying essentially, like if we cannot sit and stand, if there's an opportunity to do one or the other,
yep,
we should do that, but not do both all the time. And that's where Jet's amazing, right? He can stay standing or stay sitting. Dungy,
but then apply it one step further, which is what we talked about last time. How do you even set a bike up so it's balanced? So you hear the pros talk about it. One of their frustrations is when they predict the bike's going to do something and it doesn't react the way they thought it was, which then leads us all the way up to and including today's call, number 11. Is the bike set up to do what you want it to do? And if it's not, it's making it harder on the body, which is my wheelhouse. And you're like, yeah, but that's because what you thought was stiff really wasn't stiff enough because you're already bottoming out.
Yeah,
it's all about those paradigm shifts. So if you think the bike's accelerating, well, it did until it didn't. I mean, you put all that together. Yeah, I'm not saying whether you should stand up or sit down in a rut. That's a legitimate full-time riding coach. But what I do have a problem with is if you know that your quadriceps are the largest consumer of oxygen, and you've got somebody who says, because Jet and Chase don't ever sit in a corner, that everyone should stand in a corner. Okay, I get that for that corner, but Jet and Chase's bikes are so well suspended that they're going to make it look like you should do that, but your bike can't do that because you don't, A, have it set up properly, and B, you're not fit enough to ride it that way for more than one lap.
Yeah, and you're not Jet and Hunter.
And I want to make very crystal clear that you and I are not throwing our listeners under the bus. It's the exact opposite. Please don't frustrate yourself to all new levels trying to emulate something that we cannot touch, whether that's technology of bikes, setup, resources, whatever it may be. Well, that's why I love
Jet and Hunter have always had great form, what we would call. But if you were to actually go talk to them, they're always evolving. So that person you see out there is essentially not the finished product, but when you went pro, he's a pro. He's a final product. You as the amateur, no matter how good you are, not quite a final product yet. You're not an outdoor national champion yet. So
well, think about what Dazzy said to your point. What did he say? Every mistake we made with Hunter, we fixed it. And therefore Jet got further faster because of what we learned with Hunter. Poor
Anything you
hunter.
learn in life, right, might take you forever, and then it
Yep.
becomes immediate,
Yep.
like you know it. So
Well,
and then of course Jet got to shortcut that. That's a huge
absolutely.
advantage they have. So
Hmm.
yeah, what you said on the like physiological side, don't take this as like we're focusing on the bike here. My ultimate key point is like anything you ride, you probably can make work. Probably, but there are a lot of
Hmm.
people who go the wrong way on the motorcycle and they make it worse than even a production bike.
Yeah.
And this is an area you got to be super careful on. I mean, if you're really chasing amateurs, you probably have a couple bikes. You probably do. There's a lot of value in you keeping one of them, some bitches, stock
Yep.
and kind of keeping it as a reference, at least early in the year. Like, now right now is new bike season. So 25s are out. And if you're making that transition and you're picking up new 25s, you should probably keep one of those things bone stock and maybe play with jetting. There's always, right? Like actually, I meant to say this earlier. Now I'll finish my thought and I'll come back to it. Remind me. There's always value in just riding the bike how it came to kind of help you understand where you're going. So
Yeah.
when you go make some changes, you can kind of hop back and forth and reference, okay, this is better. Or you know what? I now understand why KTM decided to set it this way. And now I'm fighting this other problem when I fixed one thing. There's a lot of value in that, especially like we talked about in previous show. If you haven't heard it, you got to go ride a couple hours. So if you just immediately go throw the kitchen sink at your new bike and never rode the stock one, you might start chasing issues you never knew you would chase all year long because one or two or three or four of those pieces or all of them in combination just didn't jive well with the bike. And you might think you had a suspension issue that was you bolted on different triple clamps. It didn't jive with that. Or you might think you
Yep.
have a motor issue when you put on some carburetor or some air filter or some part that just hadn't been thoroughly tested yet. And
I
especially with
think.
gases, I mean, you go switch fuels around. Well, they all have a place and a purpose, but not all fuels jet the same way, react the same
Hmm.
way. And like on the KTMs, you'll hear this a lot, and it is true. It's true for reasons that people don't understand, but they run really good on pump gas in
Hmm.
general. So a lot of dads will say, man, I just can't get that damn thing to run on race gas. Well, it's because there's so many factors there that went into getting that setup right. The compression and the pipe design and the ignition curve and all the things that they've done to make that bike run good were tuned around the fact that they sell it for somebody to run on a pump gas. So when you go
Yep.
change that fuel, maybe a couple other little variables need to be tweaked along with it to make it work. It's not that the fuel's worse, it's that the bike's not designed around that, right? So,
Well,
and then also go ahead.
we have a lot of moto parents that are chasing a lot of moving parts, and
Too many.
not to insult anyone's math, right? But if you have three variables, three to the third power is 27 different combinations, and that's with only three things. So think about it. You change gearing, you change tire selection, you change fuel. It could be 27 different combinations of why it did or didn't work. Now you start adding in the triple clamp and you change the clicker and then you change the fuel and you change the foam setting and you change your levers. And the factory guys change one thing at a time. One.
And how often do you hear kids say they've rode a lot of hours on a practice bike or something? They go get on this new race bike, even if it is better, right? You've said
Yep.
it's a fire breathing drag and they can't hang on. But even if it wasn't that fast, a lot of them still aren't comfortable on it
That's right.
because the bike's not the same. It's not worn in the
Mm-hmm.
same. It doesn't flex the same. The seat doesn't feel the same. The bars, the levers, everything doesn't feel the same. And that kid has basically molded himself to this bike he's comfortable on.
Yep.
Comfortability is unfortunately, and this is why testing is hard, more important than performance. We talked on this in the previous show. Sometimes you go make tweaks on something that you're really comfortable with that you're going to immediately think are worse.
Yep.
That's where it's really hard to test if you're super comfortable with something. So in order to test, you really got to go put time in on the new setting to get comfortable with it. So that's just stuff we talked about. I was going to touch on jetting, actually. I meant to say this earlier, or, what I was going to retouch on was parents leave so much performance on the table with jetting. It's scary. And that RJR guy, he's playing and tweaking and testing on a new 25. And we had a chat yesterday and he's working on Sundays, right? Like most parents don't realize we're passionate about this. We're working on it all the time, whether I want to or not, quote unquote, it's like that, like, it's like this, black hole, it sucks you in every day. You're like, I'm going to take Sunday off. And next thing you know, you're on the dyno doing something. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So
I'm just gonna go for an hour. I'm just gonna go in for
yeah,
an
yeah.
hour.
I don't really want to run. Do I want to change this part? I got to get my tools out. I got to put the pipe on. I got to fire the
Yeah.
bike up. And then you're like, nah, I'm not going to do it today. And the next thing you know, you're switching the pipe and spinning the dyno, and you're like, son of a. So
Yeah.
he was tweaking some stuff, and he's at elevation. So somebody's going to hit you up. What jetting did he run? Well, it depends is the answer. But
Mm-hmm.
his shop's at a little bit of elevation. It's not super high, but it's not
Sea level.
insignificant, right?
Yeah.
It's very significant. The bike picked up like 3 horsepower with a couple jets.
Mm.
Would you be the parent who wants to leave 3 horsepower on the table everywhere you go?
And how much does it cost for those 3 jets? Just roughly.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at like, the knowledge is the expensive part, but the jets are
Yep.
like, you could buy a pack of under $100. You could have a full jet kit for your motorcycle for the season,
For a
right? You
hundred
could have
bucks
every jet you needed for the whole year.
for three
So
horsepower.
yeah, for 3. And I'll tell you right now that you ain't finding 3 with just a port job or a pipe it ain't happening, right? Now,
Not
is
for
the bike
$100.
actually, yeah, is
Not
the
for a
bike
hundred
actually 3
bucks.
horsepower stronger than it's intended to be? No, it's 3 horsepower better at that location.
Mm-hmm.
But guess what? When you go to races like Loretta's, it's hot, it's humid. Your jetting's way different than if it's wintertime, Southern California, 60 degrees, sea level, and beautiful air.
And even at Loretta's, there's difference between 8, 11, and 3.
Huge. And if you're not doing that jetting, you're doing yourself a disservice. All that money you spent with your motor builder is just thrown out the window because you didn't maximize what you had. And parents are like, wow, that mod bike's so finicky to jet. No, it's not finicky. Your stock one's equally finicky.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is that if you want to be on that razor's edge and you want to chase that horsepower and you want to have the best, and it's your job as a parent or pay someone to do that for you. Because at the end of the day, why would you go spend all that money and then not maximize this 1 to 2 horsepower you have at your disposal between motos? I mean, in dirt bikes, it's rare, but in the karting world, I mean, there's like dudes like right before the race and they got the relative air density gauges out and they're like, oh, and there's like some tuner who's freaking out, sweating bullets because he's got to make a choice because the damn relative air density gauge is between settings.
Yep.
And he's like looking at the weather report and he's got his, finger out in the air. And
where's it
like,
going to go?
We're going to go with this jet. And there have been guys who have lost world championships because that tuner went the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
That's how finicky it is in that world. We're talking, one jet change can be half a horse to a horse, depending on the bike, the motor, the whatever. And that one, you didn't make the wrong call. Now, Loretta's, I would urge a parent to be within the, on the safe 1 jet range.
Yeah.
All right. We're not going to be chasing this karting razor's edge. We're going to be chasing you're not 3 jets off. Right. As long as you're within the 1 jet range, we're okay. Yeah. But if you're like, oh man, we run in Southern California with a 140 main jet, and it's dialed in, it's great. And you go to Loretta's and I'm making up numbers here, but and you're like, well, 132, you're out of your mind. And you're like, no, it's hot, it's humid, it's not at sea level, right? And then I always just say, I've learned at Loretta's, like the air kind of sits in this valley.
It's a pocket.
Yeah, I would be willing to bet if you did an air quality gauge after the week goes on, some of those hydrocarbons are sitting down in there. I guarantee you the air is not as good as up on the hill.
No way.
So that's just something that parents shouldn't be leaving on the table. If you're in the stock class, this should be the number one thing you have at your disposal is like, hey, make sure my bike's jetted good. And number 2, and I see this all the time. Oh, but so-and-so selling fuel over there. Let's go buy that one. Well, have you tested on it? Have you set up on it? Do you know what it is? Are you ready for it? Why are you switching? I mean, I see that all the time. Oh, but and then I get this call all the time from one of my really good clients. Like, oh man, we forgot fuel. We're going to can we run this brand fuel? Well, luckily, me, and I answered, go buy that one. But like, you'd be shocked at how different they can be just in tuning.
Certainly.
So don't, you need to come prepared. Well, so-and-so normally sells it there. They were out. Dude, you have a regional. You should have had that fuel in your trailer 2 weeks ago.
Exactly. Yep.
Don't make that an excuse for yourself, right? So those are things I just cannot believe. I mean, I'm as a business not capitalizing on that. We don't bring fuel to races.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to, and I don't do that. Maybe I should. People are now in the economy of convenience. So-and-so at the race will have it, right? But man, like, why would you leave yourself unprepared like that?
No, you're exactly right. And I bet you when Tony Alessi was getting all those bikes from Honda and he's dynoing them, they're going to play around with the jets a little bit to see, okay, what is this really made of? Not just whatever it came with. That's what he's testing.
They're going to find an optimal.
He's going to play with it, find that sweet spot. All right, this one's putting out, as he said, 18 at that time for the 85 or whatever it is. I just think, and this is something that I say on all of my podcast shows, is bringing everything into relative context. Like you'll have somebody that will just be hell bent that this is the gospel. Like you said, this is the only race fuel, or this is the only jet setting, or this is, and I'm like, no, and do yourself a favor. And if you're somebody who's reached out to me asking about micros, I'm not throwing you under the bus. Please let me set the context. I think it's amazing when I can't get people to step on the scale twice a day. I can get so much information out of you stepping on the scale twice a day. Is that inflammation and swelling from exercise or a reaction to food? Are you properly hydrated, over or under? Just stepping on the scale twice a day, I can help you decipher that information. And I've got people that won't physically step on a scale because it's too difficult. And then they want me to break down the percentage of macros between carbs, protein, and fats on a 3,000 versus a 2,500 calorie diet. It's like, how about we start with the scale?
Yeah,
You
I need
want
to
me
know
to,
some numbers.
well, the crazy part is I'm asking you to eat fruits, vegetables, and lean protein. To be honest with you, you can't really overeat on those. In fact, most people don't eat enough because there's not a lot of calorie density, something that we've also spoken about before.
I've learned so much on our previous episodes about what you talked about there. And I think I told, I'm kind of haven't really been on the Coach Robb program yet, but I have been working towards getting there. I'm so out of shape that I'm scared to even try it. Like that's literally what I've realized trying to get back in shape. But like I've lost some weight that I could gain weight. I'm an individual that needs that, but I had too much fat, right? So worked on that and whatever. But I learned so much on the eating side. Listen to our previous podcast. So if you hadn't listened to it, go through it. There's like, and I can't make it. You got to really listen to what Coach is saying because it's nuanced. It's always, somebody says, "What's the answer?" It depends, right? It depends on you, the situation. But the nuances aren't that complicated, like you just said. Lean meats, lean meats, and vegetables and fruits. If you stick that in your diet and you stick with those non-processed foods and the whole works like you're talking about, you will actually probably struggle. If you're struggling with weight loss, you will probably struggle to eat too much because it's like you said, it's hard to do it. So, and then on top of that, I mean, getting quality intake and all the things you've talked about, but like, do you have to go crazy with it? Well, if you feel better about it, sure, go crazy about it. But at the same time, just doing your basics. I mean, I said that to a parent the other day, you're lying. They're like, wow, I never thought about that. Just walk the perimeter of your grocery store and you're good.
That's
If you
it.
get bogged down in the weeds in the middle of it,
Yep.
you're probably not going to be buying stuff you need to buy. And it's funny when you're trying to count calories and you're allocating how much can I eat today, right? Especially when dieting sucks. It absolutely sucks. I've never done it my whole life. So now I know why people don't do it.
Yeah.
And
Well, and that's why I love the Garmin so much, because when you ask me how many calories should I consume, we always reverse the conversation and say, how many calories are you burning?
exactly.
So if you're burning 2,800, shoot to consume 2,700, not 2,200, not 1,900, because now the gap is so big, the stress level on the body. And this is what I love about our conversation. And again, thank you for everybody if this is your first time, welcome. If you've been with us the 10 previous shows, thank you for coming back. It's sometimes not always about going 12 clicks. Sometimes it's about going 1 click on my side of the equation. And then ironically on the suspension side and the motor side, like you said last time when we went through how to set up the bike, and you're like, you go all the way out or you go all the way in. You have to go back and listen to, again, put it all in the appropriate context. But what is a bike that dynos out at significant numbers with the best, highest, most intricate internals on the suspension being ridden by somebody who has unstabilized blood sugar, dehydrated, and tired?
It doesn't help you.
It doesn't help
And
you.
you want to see the best bikes at Loretta's? Not always. Like some of the pro class bikes and team bikes are sweet, right? Go watch the C class.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, if you're C class, you're watching this show, I want you to be successful. So don't think I'm talking down on you, because you are, in the grand scheme of things, you're the top 5% of anybody who's ever ridden a dirt bike.
Yep.
Right. But in the nuanced part of Loretta's, you're in the bottom 80%. You're not even the top 20%, right? Like you suck. You have a long way to get better. And that's why it's good to go, because you can see, wow, my lap time was a 2:32 and the winner was a 1:55. I got a lot of room to go.
That's reality. Yep.
And some kid on a 65 said a 2:11. I got serious homework to do. Right. So, and you're going back to your dad going, my A kit that we got on my C class bike that was done by Enzo FC, PC, whatever, which is beautiful. It's bucking and kicking and whatever. And there's some kid on a 12-inch tired 65 who just whomped you by 15 seconds a lap. Now, you might be right. Maybe your suspension's bucking and kicking, is trash and is terrible, but that's on you. You had the opportunity to show up with a good bike. So, but that class has awesome bikes and they're badass. And that's because as a parent, you're still new enough to the industry and the sport and the bikes that you think that you can buy that 30 seconds a lap. And you cannot. But more importantly, if you go buy that bike and your kid is capable of that speed, and then you miss out on your side of things and they show up all the things you just touched on. How do you say it? Say it again. It's like it's the 5 or you say under, what are the, you have like a saying for the 5 steps of success or 6 or.
The 4 pillars of success. Yeah. The 4 pillars. Pillar number 1 is preparation, which is being fed, rested, and hydrated.
Yep.
Pillar number 2 is being fit. So you have to have strength, endurance, and lactate tolerance. Number 3, you have to have a pacing strategy, which is the inverse relationship between volume and intensity. And then pillar number 4 is recovering by the hour, by the day, by the weekend, by the week, by the training block. So,
and that's a foundation essentially, because if number 1 is not accomplished,
Yeah.
Nothing else works.
Well, and if you look at those as kind of, they're all standing separately, but they're all intertwined. You could nail 1 through 3, but if you get preoccupied and you don't recover properly, let's say you're running 6 motos on a Sunday and you start the day with a bang and end with a fizzle, it's not like the bike turned to a turd. It's not like you turned into a potato at midnight. You just have unstabilized blood sugar because you missed your recovery hour over hour. So that's where it's, and you and I have talked about this on the show previously. You come in, your bike won't start, or excuse me, your bike's cutting out. If I grab my tire pressure gauge and start checking your tire pressure, you're like, dude, you're an idiot. It's electrical, it's cutting out. Well, all right, you didn't have a good race. Where do we start? Unstabilized blood sugar? Are you going through a divorce? Stress is through an all-time high? Is it because you don't have good flexibility in your hamstrings and you keep dabbing your foot, so that's causing you to lose 5 seconds per lap?
To pull your groin occasionally, which sucks.
Literally. So that's where you look at pillar number 1. Are you fed, rested, and hydrated? If you are, then you can focus. Let's move on to
how many people, we talked about this. If you haven't watched, go back. How many people show up fed, rested, and hydrated? That's pillar 1. If you don't do that, what do you expect?
Well,
and I would say, would you say 50% of Loretta's are not fed, rested, and hydrated?
Oh, I would say 75% of them.
Right.
Especially for those
right? Because it's a fun event and you're out there. And
well, I would say the majority of the kids that train at facilities showed up at Loretta's overtrained.
100%.
Because they get to,
not 100% of them, but I agree with you 100%.
They get to their regional, they qualify, punch their card in the end of May, early June. Now all of a sudden they switch gears and all they do is grind out 20-minute motos. They leave their best performances at the facility.
And the parents, have you ever seen, I mean, we see it all the time. And some parents, it's you guys, it's not this. But for a lot of parents, it is true. Man, my kid just never rides good at Loretta's. Huh. And you do the same thing every year, huh?
Yep.
What'd you say? Punch your ticket and then grind to Loretta's.
Yep. And that's the backwards part. Well, and I'm going to just be as blunt as I can possibly be. I would say a good 90% of the facilities that are out there, I've spoken, the high profile ones, I've spoken to someone that works there directly or indirectly, owners or one of the top trainers. And it's the same exact conversation over and over again. Hey, let me set the context, and there's 2 different sides to this, but you'll see why they're intertwined. I'll get a phone call from a parent that says, hey, riding coach XYZ at our facility wants to talk to you because they think that we're not in good enough shape to go win Loretta's. I go, okay, let's talk. And before we get on, now I'm not trying to be right. I'm just gathering data. Let's have an adult conversation. And then I show them the athlete is putting 4 hours a day on the motorcycle. They're burning close to 6,000 calories a day. They're on the bike so much, between cleaning the bikes, prepping the bikes, getting ready for tomorrow, plus some of them with schoolwork, they can't eat enough calories on Monday to get ready for Tuesday. And you do that for 8 weeks. So I say to the riding coach, we need to back off on the volume. Don't you fucking tell me how to do a job. I'm the riding coach here. Hey, I didn't tell you how to do your job. I'm interpreting fatigue-related symptoms that are showing. You're calling me saying that the athlete's not in shape. I'm showing you all kinds of testing assessments. I'm showing you incremental improvement until we got into that last block, and you're gone in panic mode and you're grinding out 20-minute motos. The athlete shows up completely exhausted by Thursday. It's called residual fatigue. And then you want to blame his fitness when really you're running the athlete into the, don't you tell me I'm an ex-pro. I was a factory rider. I don't give 2 shits what you were, right? If you dyno a motor that's got 100 hours on it, it just validates that you've got a tired motor. I'm showing you a human dyno report that shows that you're overtraining the athlete. Now, what you do with that information is between you and the parent. The parent's paying you. I have been called into the conversation because I work for the same
quickly as a parent. We have this problem all the time, whether it's a doctor office, where it's a this or it's a that. As a human, we want somebody to do something, right? So we take our kid to a training facility and we want to see speed improvement. We want to see effort improvement. We want to see more work. We want to see working out. And yes, you will need to do all of these things if you want to be successful. However, like in this scenario here, if your kid is not, what would you say? You can only train as hard as you can recover. That's in our previous
exactly
episodes.
It. Mm-hmm.
So you got to go back and listen to some of this stuff, guys. It's gold. And the more you go down the rabbit hole of trying to apply this in your life, the more it becomes relevant.
Well, the definition of overtraining is not absorbing the work that you've done. I could give Derek 8 hours, absorbs it like a stud, comes back tomorrow ready to go, or at the end of the week. I give another athlete 8 hours and it just completely railroads them. So
And that's not
when,
something that can't be built through. I mean, that's a question.
well, it has to be built. That's the key. That's why you see me when I do social media, I say champions aren't born, they're built. And people scoff at that all the time. And I'm like, I have, at the time of this recording, 313 amateur number one titles now, right? I'm not the one putting in the sweat equity. I'm trying to direct the efforts that are being put out there. The parents have the desire to do the right thing, like any wealthy person, right? They're willing to pay money to shorten the time to get from where they're at to where they want to be. Wealthy people realize the value of time is way more valuable than money. I'm not trying to hold information away from you. In fact, I'm all over social
They're
media,
all over talking about the
YouTube,
basics.
everywhere,
Yep.
right? The idea here is when a parent comes to me and says, why is my little Johnny tired? Great question. If they're overtraining, i.e., not absorbing the training they're doing, you need to back off and eat more. It'll balance it out. But here's the part that I have a problem with. When you have a child that's not willing to do the work, and then you have parents that say, what? You're mad at my little Johnny because he won't do the work? I give two shits with whether or not Johnny does it or not. You hired me to provide programs. And if he or she does it, they will get fitter, they will get faster, guaranteed. So this is where it becomes interesting. Hey, why is my little Johnny getting tired? Well, because he's not in shape. If you're going to go ride at a facility and that riding coach is going to put 8, 10, 12 hours a week on you, you damn sure better go there in shape. The problem
That is a
is
huge mistake, right? Most
it's
people
a
go
huge mistake.
out of shape. Yeah.
Well, you have two problems. You go there not in shape to handle the volume of training that facility currently, I think everybody should do this. When you go to a facility, ask them how many hours a week do they normally ride, and ask yourself honestly, can you handle 6 hours a week, 10 hours a week, whatever the number is?
And young
Then,
kids, I think, are resilient enough who ride a lot, like who like to ride, who are riding a lot, right? A kid who goes to a facility and loves to ride, they'll be able to put in the seat time, right? Like they'll feel okay. Like as you get older, at least for me, all of a sudden your body is just like, oh man, I'm sore today, or my back, or my this, or my that. You just don't have that in you anymore. I think that, like, personally, I mean, my body just isn't what it was. So like, back when I was at 30, I started riding more and trying to go to Loretta's that year. I got hurt really bad, but like I did go, but I hurt. I would notice, like, all right, if I put in a serious effort on a Sunday, back when I was young, I'm at work Monday, like we're ready to rock, no problem. But hey, something is different with your body. And you can go down that, physiological side. Your body does change with age and stuff like that.
sure.
So hey,
Well,
that
just
recovery is
because
just
you
not there. I
can,
can't go to the gym on Monday and put in a hard workout. It ain't happening, right?
well,
And
that's the hard part. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
right, and
You
that's what I
know,
say. These young kids don't know, so
mhm.
they're just gonna. But they're not feeling these effects the way that we do as we get older. But they actually physiologically are. They just mentally don't know that they
But
are.
here's the problem with the physiology world is there's a delayed lag.
Yeah.
What you do today, you won't see manifest itself for 6 months. That's the magic number. Unfortunately, we're talking about the negative side of overtraining. You get buried if you think about it like an integer line. If you start January 1 at 0 and each week you're going -1, by the time you get to the end of the year, you're 52 points in the hole. Now, for people who don't like integer lines, we're just talking positives or negatives. Every single day, you need to be in the positive. So, for example, when I have an athlete that goes to Loretta's this last year, we looked at their body battery every single day, and our goal was stay above 90 to 95. And all of the athletes that we had that finished in the top 10, all of them were above 90
Which
on
is
body
amazing.
battery.
Like I have the
But that
Garmin
doesn't
stuff.
accidentally happen,
No, you guys
right?
have worked at it and know your
But we
metrics.
knew what we had to do going into it. And this is how we kept them from overtraining before we got there. And then when we got there, like you said, you spent all this time and you mess your jets up. You just left 3 horsepower on the table. You get there and you all of a sudden turn a blind eye to heat, humidity, fatigue, mental stress, etc. Body battery is now. Let's go a step further. I bring my bike in and I'm like, Derek, I want you to dyno this bike. And you're like, Rob, this thing has 100 hours on. I'm like, yeah, but I want to see what it's got. And you're like, all right, puts out 43 horsepower. And I get a brilliant idea. I'm going to go run it in the mud at Millville this weekend. A lot of elevation. I'm going to add some extra load with some mud and I'm going to race it. And then it grenades. And I call you up and I'm like, Derek, why didn't you tell me it was going to blow up? And you're like, well, you idiot. Had 100 hours at elevation with mud. What do you think was going to happen to a bike that's got 100 hours? Now come back to the conversation. Why is Johnny tired? Well, it's because you're not in shape. Well, if he is in shape, you're running him into the ground. There's your two
Yeah,
answers.
and it's so hard as a parent, especially new to this. I can't say how many families I've seen do the same business model, the same model.
Mhm.
Kids pretty decent. They take it seriously, but just
Yeah.
maybe one weekday and both weekend days they ride. They don't really train. They just ride. The kid's an athlete or something, right? Maybe has some school athletics. Good athlete. Make it to Loretta's. Oh, wow, this is awesome. We'd like to do better. Kid's naturally talented. So what happened next year? Let's go to the facility, right? And this is probably after a couple of years of getting to Loretta's, but you're just weekend warrior. Well, they go to facility in the first month. It's like, oh man, he's gotten so much better. I can't believe it. Well, you rode the most you've ever rode, right? On
Mhm.
tracks that are generally a little bit better, a little bit tougher. And what do they all do? Sprint, 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 sprint,
That's
sprint.
all they
Especially
do.
when you're coming on, like if you're not coming on in the right time frame of the year,
Mhm.
realistically, a program should be geared towards when you get onboarded. The problem is that most of the time you're just hopping into what they're doing. So how are you supposed to do an onboarding program, right? So they do that, but all of a sudden, depending on how far behind they were and how talented the kid is, they'll have some plateau they hit. So it's
Mhm.
improvement, plateau. And then every gain after that from a speed and a result standpoint, it's like clawing at gains because you're at a whole bunch of limits. You're at the limit of their
Mhm.
physiological side and their training side and their volume side, plus their talent limits a little bit there and all these other factors, bike and whatever, right? And then all these parents do the same thing. Like, man, I didn't know how much it would cost just to keep a bike running, right? And I didn't know, all the, it's just brutal. So 90% of the time, what happens is after 2 or 3 years of this grind, they get out of the system, right? Either they got the success they wanted, a lot of them don't, most of them don't, or they didn't get the success they wanted. They got that plateau and they stayed there. And then a lot of times, some of them will quit, move on, whatever, right? Or some of them will reevaluate who are smart and that type of person. Not say smart, I mean, just they still want to stick with it. And they go look at it and go, kind of what we're talking about. I need to listen to Coach Robb about some fitness stuff. Man, we ran into this every year. Or, man, my bike or whatever, right? And then all of a sudden they kind of do their own program. They kind of hop in with some facilities if they can, right? They back off a little bit on volume. And all of a sudden the kid's riding the best they ever rode. And you go, if you just listen to some of these podcasts and you listen to this and you kind of listen to the pros who you say, man, that guy's pretty fast, but he don't train. He's not a facility. Why is he doing that? Well, he did what you did.
Mhm.
And they say, well, I kind of do my own thing now. And,
Yeah.
you know, hey, now I do believe in facilities if done right. Like there's no other place nowadays to go get quality tracks and quality ride time. But doing it right is what this discussion is about, as opposed to just going in. And again, I do believe there's a lot of great intentions at these facilities. And I'm not saying they're all wrong. Because I'm not at every single one every day.
No, of
Right.
course.
It's
Yeah.
just that you see the same thing and it doesn't really matter, insert which facility they go to. There's only so many, right, that are big.
Well,
But
there's the crazy part is like I've worked with some MXGP riders, and one of my riders is under the tutelage of Joel Smets, 5-time world champion. And Joel will give me the riding schedule of that rider 2 weeks in advance because he knows the physiological focus of every day on the bike. We look and discuss at the residual goal Monday through Sunday, week 1 to week 6. What are we trying to get out of that training block? He tells me what we're going to do on the bike. We discuss what the intensity is going to be on the bike and what we're trying to do. And then, therefore, I write all the off the bike to complement what he's doing on the bike. I've never had one facility in the United States that would be willing to give me that. In fact, they
why
get
is your
butthurt. They go,
right?
don't you effing tell me what to do on the bike. I'm not telling you what to do the bike. I'm asking you to convey to me what, when I write Derek's workout on the motorcycle, I'm looking at your testing data. I've looked at where your weaknesses and biggest opportunities for improvement. It could be muscular endurance. It could be lactate tolerance. It could be a multitude of different things. A lot of people don't realize, like when you roll your throttle on and you go from an idle jet all the way up to the main jet, right? Well, you're going to use all energy systems on the motorcycle. I don't care if the race is 6 minutes or if it's 30 minutes plus two. You're going to use all three energy systems. People argue with me all the time. I'm not using, let's just say, anaerobic threshold.
Bullshit.
All right. First time you put the bike down and you have to pick it up, especially when we have a Kickstarter, and you kick that bad boy a dozen times, watch that heart rate. You're going to go anaerobic. So
Well, and
when
I could go in. I mean, I may be wired this way, but my whole life I could go anaerobic instantly. Like, okay, just put more effort out.
Mhm.
Right? It doesn't always equate to speed.
But the
Right?
problem
But
is when you go anaerobic, by definition, you're working in an environment without the presence of oxygen. And we're mammals. What do you think that's going to do to your speed?
oh yeah, it slows you down. I'm
It's
just
going to
saying that
slow
like a
you
lot of
down.
people don't grasp it. Your body is, go watch the 100-meter sprint. We're talking 10 seconds of their life. and they're 100% anaerobic. There's a reason why they can't carry that pace to the 400. The 400 is only 40 seconds of their life. So if you're telling me little Johnny in a 2-minute lap can't go anaerobic, there's something wrong with you
Well, but
in
the
your
problem
mentality.
is when I say to a moto family, I want you to race at 85% effort, and that will be fast enough to match somebody's 100% effort. It's for this exact reason. Because if you put the bike down and you're already at 92% of max, when you get the bike up and you get it cranked up, you won't resume at the same speed you went down at. You can add 5 to 20 seconds a lap until you get back into a mode of
So we
aerobic
talked about the
environment.
motor and the power curve going over the top.
Yep.
And then it signs over. 4-strokes don't really
That's
do
why
that.
that's why we want to have that little LED at the bottom of the visor,
Yes.
so you can
Yes.
kind of see. Because
No.
I would love, I mean, we have, in fact, we just created, we just got a new batch of these. These are the watch me's. These are the mounts that goes on your
Yeah. I saw
bar
that on Instagram.
to
Yep.
hold it. Yep. But I would, I like to have this on the bars. And if there's a place on the track that you can take your eyes off and be able to look at something, your heart rate monitor, that's beautiful. But how cool would it be if you just could see the LED, that you
Yep.
could see that you're getting close to that, orange soon to turn red. Now, this is where the moto parents go AWOL with me. You're telling my Johnny to slow down? No, I'm saying Johnny needs to adjust his or her pace to get to the finish line. If you're doing 30 plus 2, you get, let's go Loretta's. If you're leading at lap 6, it doesn't matter. You can be leading at lap 9. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter till you hit the finish line. And if you and I are out running a 5K, and I go, Derek, how'd you do? And you're like, dude, I won my age group. Well, hey, what was your time? I ran a 17:35. Cool, you won, and the elapsed time was 17:35. I didn't ask you what was your pace at every mile, because now I'm starting to get into what your strategy was. Maybe a negative split it. Every mile you got progressively faster. That's a strategy. We train for that strategy. So you go to Loretta's, you get a 5th place start, you stay aerobic, and then every lap thereafter, you pick up the intensity, staying out of trouble. You go, this is what Blake Baggett was renowned for. What they always say, Jason Wygant would say, here comes El Cucaracha. He's
When I
coming
looked
on
up,
strong.
as a parent, you should go look up lap times. Go do this. They're published. You can look at pro, you can look at Loretta's, you can look at every class.
Yep.
And go look at the fall off, right? So this is going to tell you everything you need to know about what you could strategize, right? You guys have already done this homework, but if you're seeing like in Chupacabra's day that, man, every single outdoor national, these leaders will be out there, and top 5 are kind of similar lap times.
Yep.
But then last 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 laps, I'm seeing a 2 to 3 to 4 second fall off. Man, if I can just kind of stay a little bit better early and then push through the end, I'm going to be just, and then it's mentally defeating and all these
Well,
things.
think about this. You and I are running the 5K. The gun goes off and I take off like I stole it. And I go through that first mile marker and I'm already at my anaerobic threshold. It's not if I'm going to go backwards. It's just a matter of when, because I'm already at my AT. All of a sudden, I finally cross it and the grenade goes off and I start coming back. Well, you started out a little bit more conservative. Now I'm slowing down by 5 seconds a mile and you're purposely picking up the pace by 5. This doesn't mean you sandbag the first mile. You wanted to run the sub
threshold. Yep.
Well, you wanted to run below an 18-minute pace. So you do the math backwards. All right,
Yep.
go through the first mile at 5:50. Then okay, based on what we've tested with heart rate training, you can go 5:50. Then you're going to run a 5:42, 5:40. Then you're going to go down. So as I come backwards by 5, and let's just say for even numbers, you're increasing your pace per mile by 5. You pass me in a net gain of 10. I'm down 5, you're up 5. You destroy me mentally and physically. Well, I hope this doesn't rub people the wrong way, but now I love this. Now we're into mind games because
Right.
I've destroyed you mentally and now I've already beaten you down physically. Now I see Derek go by me and I'm like, dadgummit, there he goes again. And then I'm trying like crazy to hold
right?
on.
Even if both had equal fitness levels, one managed it well, one
Pillar number 3, strategy.
Right.
Inverse relationship between volume and intensity. If you've got a 20-minute moto at Loretta's, you cannot go out at a sprint speed and think you can sustain it. I use this example all the time. If it was doable, Usain Bolt would have already broken the 2-hour mark for the marathon.
Right.
Well, then why do we look at that and go, well, that's a ridiculous comment, Rob? Well, then why do you encourage your young athlete to sprint and then try to hold on? They're going to go backwards. And then the parents
here's what
get
I
so
was going to
pissed
say
off.
with the power curve is like, if you're over the top on the power curve, there's less power out here.
Yep.
Right. There's a peak. Okay. That's our peak. And then there's less out here. So the more you rev, the worse this gets. Well, that's kind of what anaerobic threshold is to your heart rate, which is you cross this threshold where all of a sudden it can't keep up. You start declining on power, human power.
Yeah.
And until you get recovered to where you need to be, it just gets worse. It gets worse.
You
It
don't
gets
get
worse.
faster.
You
Yeah,
get
you get
slower.
slower and slower.
Right. And the only
But
way to
when I
recover is to slow down.
but when I say that in a running environment, every one of our listeners would concur with it. And then you go to a training
Oh, they
facility
don't get it.
or no, they get it, but they'll do the exact opposite because supposedly riding a motorcycle defies the laws of physiology. If I were to jump into my endurance market and took the ideology that these facilities run under and these so-called riding coaches run under, you would get laughed out of the endurance market. They'd be like, "What are you doing? That is the dumbest thing."
I just think
Now,
parents struggle, and this is what the podcast is about. They struggle to really understand that it's man and machine,
mhm,
and the machine is important, but not,
yep,
in my opinion, as important as they think it is. But it's very important. But the man is on the bike, or the kid, or the daughter, or the child,
yep,
and it is parents will all tote all it's one of the most physically demanding sports in the world. Yes, it is. So you should be
mhm,
treating it like a physically demanding sport. And we're not talking about a 100-meter sprint. That's
mhm.
literally, when you start looking at time components, that's 10 seconds. We're not talking about a 400, which is one of the hardest anaerobic threshold sports there is, at right at
Oh,
40 seconds.
absolutely.
Or then
Yeah.
we're not talking about an 800, which is at, I don't know these times because I don't keep up with it, but 2 minutes or whatever, two
Sub 2 minutes.
130s or whatever,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And we're not
Yep.
talking about a mile, which is sub 5 minutes. We're talking about, for most of these kids, at minimum a 10 to 12 minute output effort. And then for a serious important race, a 20 to 25, to then become pro, a 35 effort, which documented is the hardest sustained anaerobic threshold activity on the planet. That's what they've said pro motocrossers are. There's no other sport in the planet that has such high sustained heart rates for that long.
Mhm.
And you're telling me that, oh yeah, you can just overcome that with willpower.
Well, think about this. And I'm going to stay focused. For those of you that run off road, it's even a more difficult environment. But because our show predominantly focuses on navigating amateur motocross, think about, with the exception of one race for the entire year, there's an exception. There's always a few races here and there. But for the general rule, how long are your typical qualifier motos?
10 minutes.
4 to 6 minutes. Like if
Yeah.
you go to mini O's, if
Yeah,
you
yeah,
look
yeah.
at the
Those are really
times,
tight, especially
four
supercross. So like
laps,
5-7 minutes.
four
Yeah.
laps, 52 to 55 seconds.
Right.
Right. So just stick with me here, just for general illustration purposes. Let's say that you're leading up to Loretta's, you're racing 5 minute races. And then all of a sudden you've got to flip a switch and go run 3 motos per class and do a 20. So it's like my 5K runners training all year long for a 5K. And then the last race of the year, we go run a half marathon and wonder why they can't go the distance. It's the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. And when I say dumb, I'm not saying our sport is dumb. I'm saying, when I say to a parent, we can't go against the principles of physiology. Well, yeah, but my riding coach is XYZ and he or she was in this factory rig and they did. I don't give two shits. I
Well,
don't.
and a lot of these, this is the sad part about the sport. The unfortunate side is I do not know how well trained James Stewart was coming into pro. Right. Like, I don't know his fitness program. I don't know how it wasn't bad, meaning like I guarantee there was something, whether he played it off or not. But at the same time, I don't even think James would try to sell you on a fitness program. That's not his MO, right?
Mhm.
Part of what made him special was James. He just was that talented. And Jet's in the same boat, as fit as he probably is. And I don't think they came in underprepared. I can
Right.
also say that Jet's 80% of effort level, or 60 or 50, is top 5.
All day long.
So he doesn't actually have to have all these other things lined up quite as much as the average show does. And
Mhm.
James didn't have to have, and I think what actually probably, and I don't know, I'd have to ask James, I don't know, is when he went head to head with Ricky, when he finally moved up to somebody who was of challenging capability, right? Who's like, all right, because James was always faster on paper, faster lap time. And he was on a, not only was that, but he came up on a worse bike. He came up on a 252 stroke, which was in hindsight probably a 3-second lap disadvantage in outdoors at minimum.
Yep. Minimum.
So, that wasn't helping him. But he finally came up against some competition that was like, all right, this guy, maybe not quite as fast, but he's really fit and really relentless and all these other factors, knows how to manage races, knows how to strategize, all the things you talked about.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, James probably went, shoot, fitness is kind of important. I didn't really think it was, because it never had been. He was fit enough to go the distance no matter what, because he was just fast. Like, and this is where talent and capability and all these other factors come in. Some guys can go really, really fast without trying. That it's not hard to them, right? And
look at Josh Hansen, look at Justin Hill, look, Josh Hill. Those guys are just naturally
so their fitness
brilliant.
program's not as important to them. And so this is where, as a parent, yeah, listening to this factory pro might work, might not work, or good pro, but some of these guys were just really, really gifted, and they never really did figure out the other side of the program. Now there's a couple of them that really are fitness fiends, right? Like they just love
Mm,
fitness.
yep.
They might know a thing or two, right? They might be pretty solid, and they probably worked with a guy like you, and a lot of them have. So like a lot of these guys who, I mean, I don't even know what their business. I don't honestly. I keep my head down. I do my work. I'm a nerd for this kind of
Exactly.
stuff, right? I don't know, but I know you work with the Martins a little bit, and
Hmm.
and they're starting their own training program. You're gonna bet. I'll bet big money that there's things that they did with you that will have to be incorporated in their knowledge base, right?
You
And
would hope
so,
so. You would
yeah,
hope
you would hope
so.
so, right? I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not saying it is or it isn't, but I mean, people don't understand that not all these pros learned everything on their own, right? So,
Well, that's the scary part. In I've said this publicly, but I think it's worth reiterating here tonight is, I've had numerous 250Fs, but I don't think Mitch Payton should hire me for a factory mechanic. And just because you've raced professionally doesn't make you a physiologist or a nutritionalist. And that's what disturbs me with these facilities where, let's face it, most of the facilities have an ex-pro. I've had the privilege of working with Ryan Sipes. Ryan Sipes was probably one of the most receptive guys I've ever worked with. He would ask questions. We would have a dialogue on volume. We worked through ISD and 6-day enduro and the whole 9 yards. And when he was doing some of the hard, Ryan's a great guy. If I had a rider, you'd bet your bottom dollar I want you to go work with Ryan Sipes. Now you have JP Money at next level, great girl, a lot of experience, right? I could go through each facility. Colleen has probably one of the most decorated facility resumes in existence. You could go through Club. I'm just trying to think of some of the big ones that most of the listeners would reference. Phenomenal facilities. They ask a lot of questions. Colleen does a great job. She has a very diversified staff. But what I love about Colleen is Colleen's like, I'm on the bike and I'm going to hire people that handles off the bike. And they've got a
she's
registered
kind of looked at it
dietitian.
that way, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Registered dietitian. I know Brandon at Club has a registered dietitian. They make meals, right? We've come a long way. That's not what I have a problem with. What I have a problem with is still people are not looking at the residual fatigue. People are not looking. I mean, look at the epidemic that we have with fatigue related diseases, Epstein-Barr, mono, um, chronic fatigue, Addison's disease, all these fatigue related diseases, which are 100% avoidable. That's not, those fatigue related diseases are not indigenous to just one facility. It's the sport in general, because you have riding coaches that don't understand physiology saying you need to do more, facilities that the parents are paying a premium to be there. The parents want to get their money's worth. So the facilities are in a bind. They've
Yeah.
got
How
to,
do you pay a facility to say, hey, your kid needs to sit this week?
yeah, exactly. And
I'm
that's what
paying
make
money.
well, in the ones that I do have relationships with, like I'm very fortunate, Ian Gray at Psycho Ranch, JP Money at Next Level. When you look at these different facilities, Zeb Armstrong, who owns Hangtown and a lot of the tracks out west, those are owners of facilities that are like, okay, you know, like Ryan Sipes is no longer at Sandbox, but when he was there, it was like I felt so good because my rider Chase Deschelle is there, and it's like, okay, cool, or he was there. Now that he's with the Future MX, he's under with Kyle Cheeseman. But the idea
Yeah. Well, is
here is,
Kyle heading up that?
yeah, that's his whole program
Okay.
over there,
Gotcha.
and it's a great program. It's well funded. It's got a good vision. They're doing it right. Their intentions are pure. Then you look at somebody like the HBI guys who put a lot of their own money in, husband and wife,
Yep.
and I may be incorrect with this, but like I didn't ever hear about a performance program associated with that program. And I look at all the millions of dollars that were put into that program, and they got nothing in return except a bunch of burnout riders. Now, some people would argue, hey, Masterpool got to go over to PC. I understand that.
20 minutes.
You know what I mean? PC was able, or excuse me, Ty was able to leverage that. But what's Ty's parents' background? They've got an extensive ski background. So they're a perfect example of, they know the parameters of performance, and Ty's are an example of that. But yeah, my thing is I love facilities. I love the fact that facilities are out there. I'm a little bit jealous. I didn't get to grow up in that area. I grew up
Right.
riding in the
I didn't
Orange
either.
Groves,
So they didn't
you know.
exist. I mean, I didn't
No,
think MTF really existed. I don't think so.
no,
No,
it didn't.
Davey's younger than me.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Well, and then you look at like Ian Gray at Cycle Ranch. You show up to that track, it's prepped, it's watered properly, it's well organized, it's super safe. And because of that, look at how he's grown the numbers in that Texas market. But
I
this
wish
is
more
where,
people would. He'll keep it building and growing. Like we're South
Mhm.
Texas, quote
Yep.
unquote, and Dallas is like the riding market at the moment for whatever reason. But no, if Ian, his consistency's been great, and I think that we had a problem in our area where the consistency of tracks in the area were bad. Like you said, it's going to be this, it's going to be that every time you go, and I think that allows you to build, right? It allows you
Yep.
to build your rapport and your people. So yeah, people, if you haven't been to Texas or if you haven't been to Cycle Ranch, it was the track that I grew up on, and it's worth the trip. It's a really cool facility.
Absolutely.
It's a
Well, and
nice
then you look
facility.
at like with Jake Masterpool and his dad running, the 956, his facility. I think that's the right number. They're putting a lot of effort into it, and it just JP Money and her husband doing a great job there in Carolinas. And you've got Jason who bought Moto Bros down in Lake Okeechobee, and you start putting all these. Get Waldo's doing a great job. One of our coaches, Jamie Hunkler, is going to be going there during the winter.
Jason, who at Moto Bros?
Uh, I apologize, I don't remember his last name.
Is
Jason
that where
Bob.
PRMX is at right
I
now?
I would be lying to you if I said yes with any
I
confidence.
think they are. I was just
Yeah.
curious. I saw him out there. I know the name. I think the two
Yep.
names are
It
together.
used
Yeah.
to be called Florida Tracks and Trail. He bought
Okay.
that, and then he bought Punta Gorda as
Oh,
well.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then so he's again he big he is a big fan of moto, very passionate about it. But
You
when
have
you
to
get,
be, right?
well, that's exactly it. And it is what comes first, the chicken or the egg. It's like you and I. Is it better to have a brand new bike that's got A kit suspension and modern motor, or be fit? I'm going to say you've got to be fit to ride the bike. But then when you ride the bike that's designed like the way you're capable of doing it, my responsibility is to make sure that you're fitter than the bike is going to serve you. Like if you're on an 85, if you're working with me, you're already getting ready for a 125. If you're on a 125, we're already prepping you for a two, because it's not if you're going there, it's a matter of when. 65s to 85s.
Well, that's missed in our industry so much. Not just a prep for the bike, like you're saying, but
Yeah.
the vision of the future. What does your vision of the future look like if you're a racer? Your vision should be going pro. Nothing else
Mhm.
matters. So a lot of parents get caught up in this day to day, trying to win today when they're putting off the win tomorrow. And I mean, like Lawrence has had that mentality, right? Their vision was, how do I prepare my kids to become world champions? Well, then I need to go
Dazzy,
to, right. I
Dazzy's
need to
on
go to Europe. I
record.
need to run
Yeah.
EMX. And I mean, you had said this, I don't know if we said this publicly, so I don't know, but like basically their program, like coming here to the US, had things not gone the way that they went, they maybe have gone back to Europe because
Mhm.
they wanted to prepare those kids to become pros. And
Yeah.
so, the flip side of that is like, if you're a parent, you, like you said, your eye needs to be on the prize of the future, which is I want to be a great pro. Now, give Brian Deegan credit. Does winning titles matter? Does this matter? Does that matter? Well, his answer was, if it gets you the ride that gets you the title, it matters. But otherwise, it does not matter. You can talk to all sorts of amateur national champions who never panned out that'll tell you it meant nothing, right? So if you don't have that vision to becoming a great pro and training to become a great pro, and understanding why some of this workload may not suit this race coming up in January or in October, but because this workload suits the next year and the next year and the next year, then you understand why you're doing it.
Well, take that thread of thought one step further. One of the things I would encourage the parents to think about is, what kind of individual is your athlete? You're one year, it's like, all right, Jet and Hunter, they're the example. We've got to emulate them. Oh, let's just say that it wasn't in the same year. Then 2 years later, it's like, oh, Brian Deegan's doing it the right way. I got to do what Brian Deegan's. Oh no, I got to go do what Ryder D's parents. No, I got to go do what Seth Hammaker's parents did. No, I got to go do what Marchbank's parents did. Oh wait, Marchbank's trained at club or at MTF. Oh, I got to go to MTF because that's where Marchbanks is at. What fits for your child? Because the same way that somebody might like a certain type of grip or a certain type of glove or a certain type of boot or a helmet, I just see so many parents, it's like flavor of the month. This is the new riding coach. This is the
The
new
motorcycle side,
technique.
that's so frustrating. Yeah.
Well, but what's interesting is when you go and you look at how, let's just kind of bypass all of amateur and go look at the pros. Look at how stark contrast, and you mentioned it even here today, how different Jet is from Tomac in regards to riding style. Both have won championships, so you can't say one's better than the other, right? And if you look at Sexton versus Barsha, both have won championships, but you can't say that one's better than the other. It's very individualized.
Or
And yet,
Sexton Tomac, right? They went
yeah,
head to head, contrasting styles.
yeah, but you've got parents that keep trying to squeeze the rider
Right.
into the flavor of the year facility, riding coach, technique. Stop. Barsha, don't throw those whips, he probably would have dropped out of the sport when he was riding for,
Yeah,
early
right.
Honda days. And then that's what brings all this full circle is everybody's got, again, what is it that you know about your athlete and do a better job? Because Tomac, everybody around Tomac, Sexton, Jet, Hunter, Barsha, all people are doing now is making sure that the environment emulates what makes them good. Think
And then I
about
think
that. Think
that
about
when
that.
maybe why Tomac became so good late in his career, they probably just leaned into all his strengths. All right, this is where we're at. We're 30 years old, going to Yamaha. We got a 30, whatever, how old he was, right?
Yeah.
Let's
Well,
just let's look at the sketch, like what Tony Alessi really did throughout his career, very analytical. Let's look at the schedule. Let's look at the tracks. Let's look at what the history is. Let's look at your history there. All right, let's be really good at these races. And then that year, if you remember, there was nights that he had bad nights, but not the bad nights that he'd had on Cowie,
yep.
right? Okay, he got a fifth, but he didn't get eighth. Okay, he got a fourth, but he didn't get 10th. And I think that when Tomac finally realized that was with that, that year that he just crushed it. I mean, he was unbelievable. And then the next year he crushed it too before the Achilles, right? So I think that, like you said, who they really finally figured out who he was deep down. And people don't grasp. He didn't know that at 18.
Yeah, but think about what John Tomac, Eli's dad, for those of you who don't know him, right? When Eli signed with Geico, John was very adamant. If you think that we're going to win you a championship in the next 2 years, you have the wrong guy. So John went in setting the tone. Now, the fact that Eli came out and won his first national, that didn't help,
hurt,
right?
yeah.
But the idea was that was more of kind of a coincidental thing than
right.
part of the plan. And I know that sounds a little bit crazy. Is he good enough to win? Yes. Were they surprised he won? Yes. Was that the plan?
Well,
Was
and
that the
that's
expectation? No.
like
John
have
was
a
very
plan to
vocal.
build. Unfortunately, and I will say this from my experience currently, and I hope it shifts. I really hope it shifts. The industry right now is what can you win right now?
Mm-hmm.
And more it's the schmoozing of politics. How do you get a ride? You're going to have to play these politics right? Like that's what it takes because right now I'm not saying I'm calling out. I don't know the back end of all this stuff, but like the fact that Drew Adams is not hired by Pro Circuit or some other team, but realistically Pro Circuit, right? You flew this banner for Cowie. You're hired by them. You're supposed to be their next thing. They've groomed you. They've paid this. The fact that he doesn't have that team deal as their one rookie is just mind blowing to me, but they don't have rookies. So,
Yeah.
and I've kind of heard through the grapevine that they don't want rookies now. That's not Mitch's current business model. Mitch has decided supposedly, or Cowie or whoever makes that decision, and I'm assuming Mitch is involved, that nope, we've thrown that business model out the door. And now we're going to go get established guys. We're going to get veterans. We're going to get people, right? And that's his current thing. But yeah, I mean,
but see, here's the problem though, Derek. There needs to be, and unfortunately, this is going to require kind of going up to the very, very top. Riders and their families have to feel comfortable that they can build a relationship. Let's just generically call it a team, where it isn't you've got to win this year or you're released. Now,
I don't know how we do it. I mean, I agree with you. I just don't know how we do it.
Well,
because we got to have room for rookies.
Yeah,
so
but
you don't have room to build, right?
I'll put my neck on the line. I'll put my neck on the line because I don't want somebody to hear this and think that I'm just like this hopeless romantic. I'm currently raising the fund to take 4 athletes over to Spain to work with my riding coach, Richard McEwen, and we're going to go to Spain. Richard's from the UK. He's a very, very accomplished British GP racer, MXGP racer. I want to take Chase and Luca Medica and Bronx Grundy. I want to take a group of young riders on 85s and 125s, and I want to go to Spain, not as part of MX Nations Juniors or not to go to World, just no pressure. And I hate that word because I'm not trying to coddle anybody. Let Chase and Bronx and let Luca go over, understand what it's like to try to ride when you've got jet lag, understand what it's like to have different foods, different cultures, different languages, right? What an incredible experience. Now, I'm not trying to be the quintessential hero. I've just thought about this long and hard, and I thought, wait a second, how cool would it be? Now, obviously it doesn't hurt that Hunter and Jet, that was their path. Zach Osborne, that was their path. Max Anstey, that was their path. Why not duplicate success, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've got some private investors that are willing to invest in the experience of those athletes. Now, we're not going out, like our goal is to go over and do some races, right? Let them race in the MX3 class or whatever the classes are that they're eligible for with zero pressure other than just go race Lommel, go race Fox Hill, go race tracks. And I'm going to pay for it. Thanks to our investors, we're going to pay for it. So the parents aren't breaking the bank to get over there. Now, what is the old, and you and I've talked about this off the record. If I could give you a shrinking pill and I could sink you down to an 85 rider, how confident would you be rolling into an 85 national? With all your experience, you'd probably feel pretty good. But then I could say, all right, hey, guess what? Last weekend you raced in the 85 class at Cycle Ranch. Next weekend you get to line up at Thunder Valley, and you have to race in the 450 class. You're like, oh, pump the brakes a little bit here, cowboy. Well, where'd your confidence go? It was there and then it went away. But if I get you to go and I get Chase and I get Luca and I get Bronx to go and they race at the MXGP level, when they come back, do you not think that that's going to reset their sense of reference? Like, wow, wait a second, I've raced on the other side of the world. It changes your perspective of it's just another race. I'm not saying that the MXGP riders are better or worse than the Americans and vice versa. It's the experience and setting. It's about resetting perspectives. Now you come back and you're like, wait, wow, cool.
If that is the right model, right? I think that's our weakness in the US. So we just don't
want to
have,
bring them back.
Yeah.
But I want to bring them back like with like what Future MX is doing. They're giving them an environment with places to train and bikes and all that, which is incredible. And of course, teams want to win. But when a rider knows that he or she can go out and race, and if they don't win, they're not on the chopping block. And I think, and again, this is me putting on my business hat, speaking with the investors that I'm fortunate enough to have. When we're looking at building a team, we're like, we want a 5-year retention. Like literally make a promise to the parents. If you'll uphold your side of it, don't throw a fit, don't make a fool of yourself and a mockery of our team and our sponsors. We'll commit to you a 5-year deal. Now, that doesn't mean that we're raising a bunch of sandbaggers. It's exact opposite. Hey, I'm sorry that you have an unfortunate injury. Guess what? Don't worry about it. You still have a ride when you come back. See, that's what I think is missing, where everything is the
about
carrot.
Right now. Yeah.
Well, it's carrot and threat, carrot and threat, carrot and threat, carrot and threat. So, like, for example, we just launched a $100,000 contingency program for our energy fuel helmets. We have set over $700,000 in contingency just for Loretta's this year.
Yeah.
That comes from my investors.
Yeah.
Now, these are investors who are passionate about the sport. These are people who want to see these athletes not bankrupt their parents trying to get to the races. So we're very selective with who we choose to work with. And because we've been able to show these investors, and we have ways that we're showing them an ROI on their investment. Now, again, speaking with a lot of these people who have invested in other quote unquote existing teams or teams that have gone away in the last decade, they all say the same thing. All they were ever asked for was money and got nothing in return.
Well, and this is what parents, we're going to have an episode on this in the future. We're working on it, but what is sponsorship and how do you get it and how do you keep it?
Exactly.
And for the most part, this industry is full of passionate people. Mm-hmm. And most of the money at the pro level is from passionate people. I mean, do you really think Progressive, for whatever reason, why they're sponsoring teams, right? Like there's some dude at Progressive who likes dirt bikes. You know what I mean? So
loves dirt bikes and has a very, very, very large advertising budget he has to spend.
Right.
And that's why they're
other side. Like you look at the HBI team guys, right? They just love dirt bikes. So here's some guy who just went and spent, I'm making up numbers, but a couple $1 million over the last couple of years just to go to the races. You think that he got anything out of that? Maybe, we talked about him here. Great. Maybe some guys did some taxes with them, but you got to spend some bucks on some taxes to offset, you know what I mean? This cost. So,
but let's just say hypothetically that team goes away, just like we've seen Geico go away.
No, I'm saying, yeah. I'm just saying that. So you got to understand that
my point
sponsorship is not purely, don't gimme. I was going to say to your guys, like what most of these sponsors say, people just say, gimme. And then that's it. Well, you got to provide better value. And as a team, it's a goal to provide better value. But number two,
go ahead. Excuse me. I interrupted you.
For the rider, it's important, right? How you approach this is really important too.
Well, it's like any business. Everybody wants to, because there's a lot of passionate people in our sport. We want to grow the sport. But then the sport has a tendency to cannibalize itself.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into the politics of, Geico getting poached from, the factory connection team. That was just highway robbery. That's just anybody who was involved with that should be embarrassed, quite honestly, because the unscrupulous business practice, that's embarrassing at a next level. But the end of the day, where did Makita money go? Where did Aeronautique go? Where did the San Manuel money? I say this all the time, right? Where'd Makita go? It's not like we'd never had money in our sport. To your point, like Chevy trucks in the day, whoever that advertising agency was, it was a good fit. They were involved with everything involved with Cowie, right? It was the Chevy Kawasaki team, just like it's the monster Kawasaki team. Heaven forbid, and I'm hearing through some grapevines right now, there's a good chance that the government is going to squat down and essentially the sports drinks, not really, I guess energy drinks, they call them, right? If they really squat down on how unhealthy they are, and that money is no longer allowed to be spent in our sport, what does that do? What kind of a vacuum does that create in our sport?
That'd be huge, right? And we'll
That's
see. I mean,
scary.
obviously, there are already some pull. I mean, obviously, Rockstar and Monster involved, but I think who said this? I think Rhino said it, but there's been other rumors that Monster's pulled back already. I think they're getting in preparation for that. Like they've cut big funding to various athletes and teams and whatever. So,
Yeah, well,
yeah, it's tough.
I think that's more with what's coming with Deegan, which we could talk about separately, but I think
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
more of a reset button for what Deegan's going to request here in
Makes sense.
2025
They're getting
or
prepared.
26. Yeah.
Well, I've got about 10, 15 more minutes. So I'm trying to think. I was going to ask you if you were to tell a parent anything you know about motorcycles, and from your perspective, like how important do you think the bike is in a percentages or whatnot from your experience over the years at an amateur level?
I think at the amateur level, I think that the bike is a good 50 to 75%. And the reason why I say that is if I take one of my professional triathletes and I give them a motorcycle that doesn't have an electric start, get them to start the bike. First of all, get covered in gear from head to toe. So now they're already overheating. Let them sit and kick that starter for a little bit. Let them get that real good feeling of what it feels like to overheat, right?
Yeah.
And then put them out on the track and say, you can't come off the track until you finish, let's say 5 laps without falling. They couldn't do it. But I can take any racer and they can swim, they can bike, they can run. See the difference? And what I mean by that is when someone's fortunate enough to have someone like yourself that can help them invest what meets where they're at, sounds so fluffy nowadays, right? This bike's going to meet you where you're at.
Right.
It's just the whole idea of don't buy something that's more than you can ride until you found that you've exhausted what you're already riding. Like I always say, when you come out of the corner and you find yourself waiting on the bike, yeah, you might want to look at maybe investing in a faster motor, assuming that you've learned how to shift the gears and you keep it in the sweet spot and the bike's not signing off. But that's where we get into kind of the yin and yang of the whole program. You could have the best bike that money could buy, especially our vet riders. They do a great job of that, right? So they buy the best bike money can buy. And we've talked about this on the show previously. A perfect day for me as a physiologist is when we look at the heart rate data and you see an athlete that races at the intensity we know that we've trained them. We call it critical speed numbers. We know that the speed that lap times, we know what they are capable of. They're able to do that for 20 minutes with less than a 2-second deviation. And when we download all the human telemetry and you do that, let's say Loretta's over a week, not only can they implement on Tuesday and race, but they can absorb it on Tuesday night and get ready for Wednesday. Then when the track breaks down, the athlete doesn't slow down, right? You don't always have to go faster. You just have to refrain from slowing down. That's fast. When you have a bike that's perfectly balanced, could be powerful. It could be super mod. It could be super fast. But no matter what the bike serves, you can absorb it physically. Now, when the bike, push back on the rider and the rider pushes on the bike and it integrates into the track and you can absorb those two, you have a perfect day on the motorcycle. And now we're back to the proverbial what comes first, the chicken or the egg. If you're on a 65, it's my responsibility as a physiologist to make sure you're ready for that transition. I see this particularly in the 85 to 125 class. Most parents will, if they're on 85s, they go, my child's too young. Then they jump to the 125, get yard darted, get thrown to the ground. They go, oh, I guess we need to be a little bit stronger. Well, unfortunately, getting thrown to the ground now has resulted in injuries, and now we got to fix the injuries. You've just lost a year because you waited reactively instead of proactively. Oh, you're just trying to sell your services. There's many good physiologists that are out there. Charles Deo, phenomenal, one of the best on the West Coast. Coach CG, one of the OGs, right? He's in Texas. These guys are brilliant. And I've got Ben Greenwood in Australia. Another one of our coaches, Ben, who just moved into the Carolinas areas, actually has a PhD in human movement. He's one of our CRS coaches. right? These guys know their stuff. Go find one of them,
Yeah.
because the idea is they're going to shorten the learning curve to get you from where you're at to where you want to go. Then when you go and you invest in a motor builder and a suspension company like yourself, you're going to give them what fits. And then as they progress on the bike, you can put the equipment in front of them that as they move to the next level, they just integrate right into it. That would be my biggest thing is, and this is going to sound very disrespectful, but I'll apologize up front. Please don't wait until you hurt your athlete to start to try to fix. Don't wait until your athlete complains of always being tired. Make sure that they're fit before they start trying to go to that next level. So those are the two things that we see is people get injured and they get burnt out, like adrenal fatigue type burnout. So I think I think the bike plays a bigger role. And then, like you say, it starts to become more of an ebb and flow. But I think initially you've got to have a bike. This is one of the questions, and maybe we'll see how we want to approach our next show. But one of the questions I always have for someone like yourself is, being around factory teams for as long as I have, and I'm very blessed for that. One of the things I notice is the disparity between the practice bike and the race bike is very, very minimal.
Right. And we've talked about that in previous episodes.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I think that's something, even though it's difficult for a parent to do because of budget restraints, which I understand, it goes back to, like you're saying, spend more time practicing on a stock bike. This is where John Tomac did a great job. A lot of people don't realize that when Eli won his 250 championship, he trained predominantly on the 450. That was something that a lot of people hadn't done before. Now, I'm not saying every rider can do that. A lot of riders can't bounce back and forth. Find what works for your athlete, but that's called the overload principle. If you can whip around a 450 during the week, of course the 250 is going to feel good.
And a lot of people don't probably know, but around that time frame, if you could get a Geico Honda to last a week,
good luck.
You did pretty good.
Yep, exactly.
This is what people don't know about the pro side is like, oh, once I made, let's say you're an elite amateur and you've had the best of everything.
Yep.
And your bikes have been pretty good and pretty solid. But a lot of these parents are like, engines and bikes are shit shows, right? They break all the time. And you think, once I get a factory ride, that just goes away. But you'll learn very quickly is it might get worse.
It might get worse.
It might get worse. Not saying it always. Nowadays, some of these teams have really done good. But, for a little while there, like in era we're talking about, man, if a 4-stroke would last you 5 hours at the 250 level, at the pro level, good luck, right? It would, and I've heard rumors even to this day that if it, I'm not going to name teams, but if they're not pushing a bike off once or twice or 3 times a week, it was a hell of a good week.
Yep,
so
exactly. Well, and then take it one step further, think back to when J Coop was just putting a beating on J Mart, right? It was so obvious a star bike was significantly faster than the Geicos. What did that require out of Jeremy? He rode the living snot out of that bike because he knew he had to make it up somewhere. He's getting a salary, right? He's paid to ride a Honda.
And he's competitive. Yeah.
And he was hyper competitive on a bike that quite bluntly wasn't as competitive as the Star.
No. And that's the other thing as a parent. This is what we're talking about on the bike that I was going to say is you just have to, let's just say you think at amateurs, you are behind the 8 ball on the bike. You cannot make that an excuse too much. Like do the best you can, right? But all right, that guy's bike's clearly a little bit better than ours, we think. But you know what? You're still an amateurs. There's this other rung on the ladder that's called pros. And very unfortunately, there's going to be, you might get on a great team this year and next year somebody's got something better and the whole year you're behind the 8 ball, but you're still contracted to win. Yep. And so some of these all-time greats are winning despite their bike, right? And it's not that, again, these are the best bikes in the world. They're all really good. And I don't think parents understand. The factory bikes, I don't care. Well, sometimes, right? But for the most part, all these factory bikes are really good. They got some smart people working on them. So, they're really good. But that's my big thing is the shows. Don't make the bike the excuse that limits you from success. Make it make every other attempt on every other side to make sure that you're good. And I think currently we've laid out enough information on this show for you to be dangerous as a parent, which is, hey, if you haven't really fine-tuned your clickers, haven't fine-tuned your chassis setup, like we talked a lot about on the previous show, then you're leaving stuff on the table. And if you're leaving stuff on the table, then you might get outworked, out hustled, outbeat by some parent that decided to put that work in. And it's just time. You're already, I always say, your kid's already riding the hours. Why aren't you putting in a little bit of time learning the other stuff? He's already doing that. So, well,
and what's the old saying? And obviously in my wheelhouse, it's even more evident. I would much rather work with someone who's got good work ethic. I've had a couple of parents I've had to part ways with when they'll say the program's just too difficult. I was like, well, the ironic part is your son hasn't even put in the work. So it's pretty hard for you to say it's a little bit too much when he hasn't done 20% of what's been submitted.
Well, I was earlier in our conversation, I forgot to ask, I think Europe's doing something better than the US in general. So I think the MXGP athletes, like you talked about them actually doing kind of what you need done. I see that universally in Europe. You'll see a kid who was 20th last year in MXGP, who's a top 5, 3, 4 guy the next year. Well, when do you see that in the US? Right? You don't see it. So they're making improvements. They're doing the right things on and off the bike. They're off season, all these factors. But, and I think the training's better. And I don't know, I'm not over there, but I just see visually, I feel like I see more improvement. So my question for you is have you experienced that? What do you think Europe's doing better? Obviously you shared that one example, and you work with
Yeah.
some other individuals who are maybe on the same, level playing field there.
Yeah, 100%. You hit two big bullseyes. Like I work with Todd Waters, who owns the Race Line, which is the factory Husky team in Australia. And we talked about the idea that they literally will go and drive for 2 hours to find the nastiest blown out track that you could possibly train on. Americans, as you know, if it's not properly watered and just had a little bit too many braking bumps or too many rough edges, yeah, people won't ride it. It's
When it's
dangerous.
influenced our pro ranks, the
Yeah.
tracks have become more smooth, more fast, more whatever. Like that was
Yep.
Caden's, in my opinion, huge flaw going pro.
Yeah.
He loved rough and tough. I mean, you couldn't put a rough enough track in front of him.
Yep.
But he unfortunately wouldn't train on fast tracks, right? Like, hey, dude, you need to get fast when the track's fast.
Yeah.
Because we know we're going to be racing.
And that's what makes it so interesting to answer your question. On one side, you talk to somebody like Todd Waters, where he owns a team. He's got a 250 rider and a 450 rider, and Todd still races himself. And if you follow him on Instagram, which I'd encourage you to do, you'll see where they ride and train. It's nasty. But Todd also was Caroli's teammate at KTM. He knows what it's like to be in Europe. They don't bitch about the track not being smooth. Then the other side of the equation, when you do go to Europe, you look at 65 class. When they race Lommel, they're racing a 20-minute moto on a 65. There is no excuse for, oh, the track is too rough for a 65 rider. They run a 20-minute moto on 65s in Lommel. And
I have this argument with parents all the time, and I guess I'm the odd man out, which is, oh, they should have fixed the track. It was unsafe. He hit a kicker. That's why he crashed. No, it's your kid's job to decide whether to jump it or not. Does his skill level, match his? I mean, I think we should have smart maintenance, but like you go to Lommel, there is absolutely no time frame when that track is safe, when it's fully rough and whatever. It's safe at the pace you go at.
Well, right? And that's where this is an ironic closure to the entire circle. If you're tired, hungry, and dehydrated, you probably don't have good conscious thinking skills. So therefore you make a bonehead decision. Riding a bike that's not properly balanced, maybe overpowered, suspension isn't set right. So when you hit a kicker, the bike responds as the exact opposite way you want it to, because it's not set properly and you're not fit enough to counterbalance it. Right. And we just start stacking all the dominoes on what leads to an injury. And I think that's what's great about Europe is they ride, if you guys don't follow Liam Owens, he rides for the Cat Husky team over in Europe. Look at the tracks that those cats, no pun intended, race. They're trained on
brutal.
And
but I think if you're exposed to them young,
yes,
then you make these decisions earlier on because you're like, hey, I don't like Indoing over that.
But this is exactly why I'm so thankful I've got my group of investors. When Chase and Bronx and Luca go over, right, that's called the overload principle. When they ride Lommel, do you think when they come back that they're going to be intimidated by Loretta Lynn's?
No. And then you look at like Hurling's talking about sand on one of the gypsy thing. He's like, I'm good at it because I view it as like a supercross track.
Yep.
He's developed this level, right? You don't just hop on a.
That's what's so crazy. How can we be surprised that he's fast in sand when that's all he rides?
Yeah. And he works at it. I mean, I forget who said this, Caroli, or maybe it wasn't Caroli, but they were like, yeah, I went over there and I was way behind the 8 ball. You go to Lommel on like a Thursday and everybody there was faster than me.
Yep.
And this is like, I got some guy going by me. This doesn't even have a name on his jersey. He's not that good.
Yep.
Right. And like, what? And I forget who it was, but they're like, so I had to develop that skill set, which is, oh, this is something you work on. Right. But that's of anything in life. It's not Lommel. It's not stand. It's right now we have that in the US. We have,
without getting politically incorrect, over there, Europeans see that the bars here, they work hard to get above the bar.
Right.
Over here, the bars here, what do? We just push the bar down. We don't ask our athletes to step up. This is one of the problems I have with, and this is not to get onto a politically incorrect comment, but to stop and think about, we are not advocating for a dangerous track, but walking across the street with perfectly level pavement in the dry day of the summer where there's no chance of slipping, you could still get pummeled by a car.
Yeah.
We don't stop crossing the street because it's dangerous. And that's what I just don't understand. Yes, I understand we've had deaths in our sport. I understand we've had some significant injuries. I've been around them. I was working with Ian Trettle when I worked with him when he was on 85s and he went pro, and I couldn't move to California with Bobby Hewitt was a team owner. But when Ian Trettle unfortunately got hurt at Daytona, and his mom sends me a picture, and his entire brain, they had to cut his skull off and his brain's laying on the table. His mom wasn't mad at the track. She knew shit happens, right? That's part of the sport. Derek, you and we're not advocating that we should just have clapped out pieces of shit tracks, but on the other side of the token, nobody makes us put a helmet on. Nobody makes us swing a leg over a bike.
And I don't want it to be dangerous by any stretch, right? But at the same time,
I want my boys, my personal sons, I want them to step up. If you see that that's a dangerous kicker, to your point, then don't fucking hit it.
Right. And that's the choice you make. If a guy's willing to do it and at his own detriment, that was their choice, right?
Hey,
you have to know
if you and I are skateboarding,
yeah,
and you and I decide to drop in and we pummeled to the bottom, it isn't all of a sudden a dangerous pool bowl. We just missed the drop in on the coping.
Right. And that's exactly right. I don't go blame the track first, right?
Oh, God.
Go look at the old footage. I just posted it or sent it to a group of friends. Ron Lachine, 500, 18 years old, GPs. It was on Instagram or something.
Yeah.
Hey, his form. I never watched him ride. That was the first time I ever seen him ride. Wow. Like
poetry in motion. Yeah.
Yeah. But the track was like brutal, hard pack, rough,
never
been, never been prepped in years. And you go, well, today's riders would not ride that. Like it's just horrible, right? But they didn't consider it horrible at the time. That was just the track. And that's something and at the pro level to this day, they do the best they can. They fix jumps. They really do a good job. Having said that, by the end of that 450 second moto or second moto on that track is so brutal that an average amateur, even an elite one, would not understand it. So you if you think that it's just easy, no, those pros are amazing. And that's why they're so good at it. So you can't always make your track is going to be tough, right? You have to get that.
Well, you mentioned Howerton. Go back and look at that saddleback race where Howerton punted Bob. That track was, a lot of elevation changes, a lot of deceleration bumps on freaking concrete hard dirt, but nobody was complaining about it. And that was some of the best racing we ever saw in our lives.
I wish the tracks would go back to a little bit more of these open turns, no ruts.
Well, think about Supercross. We complain that it's dangerously fast. And Jeff Ward and I have talked about this. Why don't you just throw the whole flow pattern of the track off? Like,
don't make
if you look at
the rhythm. Yeah.
Well, think about like Supercross. They just put random shit everywhere where you couldn't come through and try to quad it or quint it or whatever.
Well, the jumps weren't built as a quad. It was, here's 5 obstacles and you'd figure it out. And they were steep. Back then, I look at it like Endurocross almost. Early Supercross was let's build things that are really hard to figure out. Yep. And then the riders would figure it out. Nowadays, they're like, we're going to build a triple, and then we have a rhythm lane, and they might do different things, but they're all the same size jump at the same space.
But here's the crazy part. If you made a track like old Supercross style, right, where it's very fragmented and all that, and if somebody decides to try to seat quad something, right, seat bounce something and try to quad it, and if they wad themselves up, they realize, well, that's not what it was intended to do. Now, there's always going to be somebody like a Jet that'll finesse something that looks insane. He always does. But the idea is, quit bitching about it. We say the track's too fast, then make it so fragmented that the track has to slow down.
The bikes are just so good. I think that we're just grasping, or the industry is wrestling with the fact that the 450 is more than double the motorcycle a 252 stroke ever really was.
Yeah.
And so when you build shit, like I already talked to enough pros about this. It's like you put a bone stock 450 with suspension on a Supercross track in the hands of an elite main event level pro, and you ask him, how's the bike? It's like way too much. Mm-hmm. Now they might want a little more bottom or a little more rideability, but at the end of the day, it's like, would you ever like turn it wide open? It's like
never.
And then like, how far could you jump in one of the rhythm lanes if you just went wide open, seat bounced it and went for it? It's like way farther than I want to crash. Exactly. And that's the answer. I mean, could you imagine a 450 like coming up to a triple wide open off that face? It would go all the whole length of the stadium.
Well, it's like 3 years ago when Tomac was coming out of that speed strip at Vegas, right? What was he, like 78 miles an hour or something? They clocked him. Yeah. Right. I'm like, dude, you side swapping that sand, that beach sand. Yeah. I mean, you're along for the ride. So
that's what we're grappling with, right? The industry is just to a point where really the 250Fs are what the 252 strokes were in their prime, if not better. And then we have a whole nother double that motorcycle at our disposal. Exactly. Factory tuning, right? Any other questions for me before we hop off?
Nope. I just want to say for everybody who stayed with us, we know it's a little over 2 hours here. We really enjoy and appreciate you guys. You can see our conversations are not scripted. We like to we're going to continue to take apart amateur motocross. We've got a lot of cool things laid out for you guys for January. We'll roll that out with you when we get together next month. Derek, I can't say enough how much I appreciate your insight. I know our listeners, based on the feedback I've gotten, and they really enjoy it as well. For everybody who's new, welcome. And for those of you that have been with us since episode 1, thank you so much for coming back. The numbers continue to go up, the responses continue to grow. And we're really looking forward to what 2025 has for us. Derek, on behalf of everyone here at Complete Racing Solutions, thank you for all you do. Merry Christmas, happy holidays to you and your family, and to all the listeners as well. Thank you so much. Derek, we'll see you next month.
Thanks, Rob. Talk to you next month, and can't wait to do it.
You got it. Peace.